This is the Hagmann and Hagmann report for today. It is Wednesday, September 17th, 2014. This, of course, is a live broadcast. I'm Doug Hagmann, co-host, along with my son, both of us in studio today. Together we are the Hagmann and the Hagmann report. Doug Hagmann here with Joe Hagmann, again, my son, fellow investigator, researcher extraordinaire. Folks, you're about to hear an incredible 3-hour programming. Incredible, at least as far as I am concerned. Done a lot of research for tonight's program, and we have a very special surprise. We're going to have Dave Hodges dropping in at half past the hour, or first hour, to talk about a few important things. We had a conversation off air, and I've got to tell you, folks, things are lining up in such a way that I think it's important that you need to listen to what Dave Hodges has got to say. In fact, prior to him coming on, if you just bookmark or go to thecommonsenseshow.com, have that at the ready, because some of the things that we're going to be talking about are at that location, thecommonsenseshow.com, for Dave Hodges at half past the first hour. Folks, you're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look far beyond the headlines, the bylines, the fog of disinformation and misdirection, which is rife right now in the mainstream media, to bring you the news behind the news. Our broadcast time is 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Saturday. Saturday, of course, being the weekend edition with Sheila Zielinski. Monday through Friday, you've got Joe and I, of course, at Hagmann Report. Our home base on the internet is hagmanandhagmann.com. And again, we're that's a slow process, folks, but just hang in there, because we're about to dump some of the most breathtaking, I believe, some of the most breathtaking information at that location. We're getting held up, of course. Somebody asked me in an email, what's going on? What happened? Why are you, for example, you seem to have stopped writing? Well, a couple of things. Life happens, okay, number one. And number two, to prepare for the radio show.
Massive writer's block.
Yeah, that's it. Actually, there's nothing to write about, folks, really. And yeah, I'm just kidding, of course, about that. But at some point, I did go through a phase, however, thinking, what more can you possibly say except it's all a lie? Anyone old enough who saw the original Shining movie with Jack Nicholson in that big hotel, remember that scene where he's at the computer and his wife comes down and sees what he's typed? Sometimes I feel like that. And yes, I still do have a typewriter. Anyway, folks, our home base is hagmanandhagmann.com. We still have HomelandSecurityUS.com as well. But we're attempting to determine if we're going to phase that out or just use that as, that's to be decided. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your belief and trust in us as we walk through this minefield of current events together. And it is a minefield of current events. Joe, you've been doing a lot of research today.
Yeah, before we get into that, I just want to make a couple announcements. Tonight, Dave Hodges will be joining us at 8:30. Tomorrow, we have Paul McGuire on for the 3-hour show. And then next week, we have a full lineup. Nathan Liao will be with us Monday, Stan will be with us Tuesday, and Greg Jackson will be with us Wednesday. His book was released yesterday, The 40 Things to Tell Your Children Before You Die, and you can find that at Amazon.com. If you couldn't get it through pre-order, you can order it now. It is available, and it's getting a lot of really good reviews, and he's selling some books. And it's not about, obviously, selling books. It's about getting the message out there, and that's what we were talking about today. So he is going to be coming on Wednesday to continue to talk about his new book, which is a fantastic book. It's a great tool for, not only parents but children, anybody who reads the Bible, who's a Christian. These are simple biblical truths that are put in a very comprehensive way that a lot of us overlook sometimes, or at least I do. And I know how easy it is to overlook some of these things, whether it's, biblical teachings or personal behavior. It's a great reminder book, and a lot of good reviews on the book from people who have ordered it, who don't know Greg. So if you can, get that book, 40 Things to Tell Your Children Before You Die. It's available at Amazon, gregjackson.com. That's Gregg, 2 G's. It's available now. And next week, Thursday and Friday, we will be.
Wait, you just hit the mute button on yourself.
I pulled the Doug.
We will be, and then everything just went blank.
We will be absent, but the show will continue as we have guest hosts ready to go for Thursday and Friday, possibly Monday. I have to check on that, but
I don't think on Monday. I think, well, perhaps. Okay.
I didn't know about Thursday this week, so we haven't really talked about what we're schedule yet.
Folks, can you see how together we are on things? There are a lot of things happening. Frankly, I'll just say this: there are a lot of things happening behind the scenes, ladies and gentlemen. That it's not ready for prime time yet. A lot of things going on behind the scenes that are affecting our scheduling, and sometimes things have to be pushed to the last possible minute to make a decision. For example, with respect to Chicago, and it's just there again. I can't go any deeper than that. It's just a lot of things that are taking place behind the scenes that we have to deal with.
Were you told Jeremiah Wright was in Erie the other day?
Yes.
I thought that was interesting.
There were 340, I think, or 304. I know it was.
Well, why I found that interesting was because I didn't hear it or see it advertised anywhere, except it was on the news after his whatever he did here was done.
I would have gone to that just to see what he had to say. And in fact, I would have gone to that with my press credentials from Canada Free Press, by the way, CanadaFreePress.com, great source of information. But only because I do believe what we're seeing right now with respect to Jeremiah Wright and others, including our own Attorney General, and this fits into the puzzle pieces, is it's this call for racial division in this country. And you might think, well, duh, tell us something we don't already know. But it's been, Joe, I think it's being accelerated right now through people like Jeremiah Wright and others like him. Go ahead.
You mentioned Holder, and you see the radicalization of these different government agencies. I don't know if you saw this, but you put a good segue in here. DHS advisor let go amid allegations of cover-up. Mohammed Elleberry, you remember him?
Yeah. Yes.
He called for a inevitable return of the Muslim Caliphate. He was let go over a long-engulfed controversy from radical views from the Department of Homeland Security. He was the number 3 on the Department of Homeland Security's power hierarchy, and now he is let go. I don't know why it took so long, but he made these comments a long time ago, I think in 2010, 2011, about the Islamic Caliphate being inevitable, about it returning, and a couple of the tweets he put out were later praised by ISIS. And this guy he talked about implementing a UN constitution and changing the way the U.S. laws are, and he's gone now. So why, we don't know. They say it's some kind of cover-up, but all I'm seeing here is information about. Okay, here we go. Judicial Watch obtained Freedom of Information Act that claims that DHS contradicted itself and Elberry's actions never even took place. We conducted a comprehensive search of the files within DHS Enterprise Correspondence Tracking System for records that would be responsive to the request. Unfortunately, we were unable to verify or locate any responsive records. This is for a program that Mr. Elberry sponsored, the SLIC system, and it was unclassified information or classified information on the system that was being declassified illegally, from what I can understand from this article.
Well, Mohammed al-Bari is accused of also, I don't think I could say that. There are allegations of impropriety with it, as in his position as within the Department of Homeland Security. There's an overlap with the Muslim Brotherhood, and there are things that there are questions with respect to his involvement, his depth of involvement with the Muslim Brotherhood, to the extent of it being potentially adversarial to the United States. And I just want people to know that. So there's a lot more to this.
A Department of Homeland Security agent said two things contributed to him getting the boot. First was that of Twitter gave the world an unfiltered look into the twisted extremist worldview of Mr. al-Bari, and also it goes on to say the other thing is that the phony investigation into al-Bari's document leaking was quickly unraveled. The investigation was phony because neither the source or even contacted DHS, and there was no evidence to provide, or there's nothing to support any claims of documents that were leaked. So maybe it was his extremist views, and they're just not admitting.
Look,
but that raises a question: why so late?
The most visible part of this, of course, is a firestorm that erupted online after. And again, he was a senior Department of Homeland Security advisor, a senior advisor at DHS. And if you don't know what he tweeted tweeted that a caliphate is inevitable. And of course, essentially compared to ISIS, but compared to the creation of a caliphate, much to this European Union. He also criticized a number of attacks on the Islamic political cult. Of course, he's got a very, very visible pro-Muslim Brotherhood advocacy.
Yeah, and he really pushed for international laws being adopted in the U.S.
He's very close friends with a Hamas advisor as well. And why this all makes a difference, or why this all is important right now, is it took this most visible act, which is essentially harmless, or really harmless, outside of it showing where this man's allegiance lies. If you consider his actions, this is perhaps one of the most harmless things he has done, ever has done. However, it is responsible for him getting the boot. Yet he, throughout his tenure at the Department of Homeland Security, he sat on a committee tasked with reviewing counterterrorism training guidelines. He actually had a hand in changing the terminology within the guides, and he created an Islamic-friendly product, which, by the way, was designed to marginalize Islamic reformers. Okay, those people who consider themselves moderates, and I suggest there is no such thing as an Islamic moderate. I saw a phrase somewhere where a radical Muslim cuts off the heads of non-believers while a moderate cheers them on, or something to that effect, and that's pretty much the case, because you cannot be a moderate and be a true Muslim at the same time, and that's not a racial statement or a bigoted statement. If you look at the Quran, what the Quran states, we could cite passage after passage. Folks, you know this, so we don't have to go over this. But the fact is, how much damage did al-Bari do in his position as senior advisor? Well, we know that a lot of the terminology was changed. We know that his support. We know his support of a future caliphate. We know through the Twitter remarks, but we also know that a lot of the training that has gone down through the ranks of DHS has the imprimatur of this man. And of course, a lot of what we see on the streets in America via DHS that is soft on Islam, soft on radical Islam, is of course compliments of that man. So for him to be booted for a Twitter post is interesting in and of itself, when in fact he should have been, never had the position, it should have been booted long before that. Joe?
Yeah, we are going to get into some financial news now. We have important and interesting information from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve will end its quantitative easing program in October. It says the Federal Reserve remained on its easy money course Wednesday, allaying market fears that it might start raising interest rates sooner than expected. Janet Yellen, the chair, reiterated that any move in rates would be data dependent, on not based on a calendar projection. In a statement released following its two-day meeting, the U.S. Central Bank left largely intact key provisions despite expectations in some quarters that it would indicate a tightening bias. It also cuts its bond buying program, and has also cut its bond buying program down to $15 billion a month. That's from $80 billion, and indicated quantitative easing will end in October. Goes on to say that the Fed's Open Market Committee did not remove language that said interest rates would rise. A considerable time after the monthly bond buying program ended, market fears centered over whether existing or excising the language could have sent a signal that the rate hike would come as soon as 6 months later. The full sentence reads, as in the past, the committee continues to anticipate, based on its assessment of these factors, that it likely will be appropriate to maintain the current target range for the federal fund rates for a considerable time after the asset purchase program ends, especially if projected inflation continues to run below the committee's 2% longer run goal, and provided the long-term inflation expectations will remain well anchored. In a news conference, Fed Chairman Janet Yellen said the committee decided that based on its assessment of economic conditions, the characterizations remain appropriate that it was comfortable with, and reiterated that the quantitative easing program will end. And interesting language was used in here by a chief investment strategist at Charles Schwab. The Fed is moving toward normalization. It will finish tapering next month. At the middle point of next year, it will begin raising rates. Now, normalization sounds like it would be something that would keep the economy stable, when in fact it is the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, I think you put that today earlier as chaos.
Yes, and this is from their own documents, and I haven't went back and looked for the documents that I have that explains what the normalization definition is pertaining to how it's used here, but it is a correction as far as I can, from what I understand. And I will pull up some of my old IMF documents here. But also we have news out of the IMF that is warning of risks from excessive financial market bets. The global economy faces a growing risk from big financial market bets that could quickly unravel if investors get spooked by geopolitical tensions or a shift in U.S. interest rate policy, the IMF said today. And we just heard from the Fed that it will end its quantitative easing program and begin to put the interest rates on the rise, which is what the IMF is warning will spark a risk of financial market failure. And they go on to say that the failure that could come from this crisis is on a scale that we've never seen before.
We are actually, and I know Zero Hedge touched on this, but we're actually manufacturing a crisis that will that's recreating the conditions that led to the collapse of 2008, but this is exponentially worse, folks, both with Yellen, as well as both of the Fed as well as with the IMF. And it's interesting. Let me just grab this here. It's interesting. I happened to receive a note from somebody in an economist. He said, "Look, you got to understand something." Let me just make sure this is correct here. There is, I don't know, folks, if you've heard of HarveyOrgan.blogspot.com, Harvey Organ. He was talking. In fact, you can find I believe it's a YouTube video with Greg Hunter from USA Watchdog, where Harvey Organ was interviewed, and Organ is saying, "Look, it's this year that everything is going to fall apart." Now, I don't really like to set dates, and I don't think it's a good idea to set dates, but he argues a good point that really the United States is really out of gold. We have no gold. We've got paper. Silver is in the same category. Joe, I think some of the things that you mentioned, he mentioned as well. Gold, of course, and V has said this as well. Gold is moving from west to east. Weaker hands to stronger arms. The U.S. has got no gold. We leased it all out. Let me just look here. In 1998, there was 28,000 tons of gold in the world. Why is that important here? Well, here's the bottom line. The gold situation here in America is the fact that we don't have any. The GLD and the SLV markets, we're not going to be able to paper over the problem that's coming. You can paper over a paper problem, this according to Harvey Organ, but you cannot paper over a physical problem, physical default. We're headed for a physical default. So the reason I mention all of this is because when you tie in the little tidbits of news, the Fed and IMF news that Joe had, with the assessments of people like Harvey Organ, as well as V, the guerrilla economist, and what Steve had said, you've got the corruption of the LBMA, the Bank of America, the Federal Reserve, who supplied basically all of the gold to China. You've got, once again, gold moving from west to east. U.S. has no gold. It's all leased out. The bottom line is we're looking at a physical default. And he's saying it's going to be closer to the end of this year as opposed to any other time. And Joe, what you're saying, and if I'm hearing this correctly, with the quantitative easing, they're going to back off that here in October. Is that what you're
starting in October, and they expect the effects to be started in March, from what they say. But the IMF warned of the risk of what they're doing to begin to rise interest rates and creating a sort of a panic in the markets, and they're worried about the inflation, how much inflation will rise, and how they'll be able to stabilize that. And getting back to
they're not going to be
normalization,
right?
Normalization is defined as to make or conform, to reduce to a norm or standard, to bring or restore to a normal condition. And some of the examples that it's used in are not something that is comforting. To make, conform to, or reduce to a norm or standard.
Yeah.
To restore to a previous.
Well, they're going to restore us to the previous bankrupt state that we were in on
reset.
The eve. Right. Well, right. And it's look at what China and Russia are doing too, creating the alliance that they're creating. The Chinese gold as well. I mean, China has got every ounce of gold that China, by the way, and this is important to understand, every ounce of gold that China does get out of the ground, they keep. They don't sell. And they're buying all of the other gold, everyone else's gold. In fact, they know that we've leased their gold, and what a mess is all I can say. What a mess. It's horrific. So will there be a reset this year? I don't know, but I'll tell you this. I don't think that they can keep a cap on the physical markets of precious metals, that being silver or gold, for very much longer. I don't know how long, but I don't think it can be very much longer. I do believe, and in fact, this Mr. Organ was talking about gold prices rising $500 a day. Just think about that, in silver prices. It'll reach $1,000 or $400 or $500 an ounce.
I don't want to, as crazy as it sounds, I don't want to see them go that high, because anytime, I don't think we'll have a period of safety, or it would be chaos.
Yeah, it's the old saying. Gold will reach $500 or $5,000 an ounce in this world, but it's a world that I don't want to live in.
Right.
But if we went to a strictly honest system of money, and by the way, this is what Mark Flynn's book gets into as well, and what he touched on Monday, a little bit about the system of our monetary system in The Fall from the Garden, which I think is just, again, folks, it's a brilliant book. Mark Flynn, the author of The Labyrinth, but what he was talking about is the only honest money, following the fall of Adam and Eve, of course, is based on precious metals, silver and gold. And
that's only been the historical money. It's only been the money from all of history until they started printing paper.
Well, right, and we have to look at the Coinage Acts and the final Coinage Act that took out the silver content out of the majority of our silver content, or all the silver content out of our coins. At that point, then our monetary system became nothing more than our coins became nothing more than talisman. Which, if you think about it, how great, how sinister this is. I don't mean great in a good sense.
If I can here, I found the document I was looking for. The IMF published a 236-page document on June 24th of this year, and it talks about the emerging market economies and the risk that has increased in the changing external environment. It goes on to say, in April 2014 Global Financial Stability Report, unexpectedly rapid normalization of U.S. monetary policy, renewed bouts of high-risk aversion on the part of investors could result in further financial turmoil. This would lead to the difficult adjustments in some emerging market economies with a risk of contagion and broad-based financial stress, and thus much lower growth, with the possibility of inflation likely to remain below a target for some time until hyperinflation will drift down. And it goes on to say the downside risks of the activity that could materialize would result in very high interest rates, a huge increase in private and public debt burdens, and it would not even be close to what the recession, the Great Recession we just went through is what they say here.
It would make the Depression of the 30s just look like a picnic, because what would happen and what will happen, and again, wherever you're listening to this broadcast, even if it's, whether it's the Philippines or the UK or in Europe, you will be affected by this, because what will happen is the purchasing power of the dollar will fall, of course, but this will also involve really all fiat currencies are tied to the dollar in some way, shape, or form. So what's going to happen is you're going to see this massive transfer of wealth from you to the bankers and to the governments. It's really in a fascist manner. I don't know how else to describe it. Just think of Argentina, for example, on a global scale. This is what we're looking at.
Yeah, and this monetary policy guidelines goes on to say risks related to the normalization of the United States monetary policy. One is tapering. Risks are expected to diminish the asset purchases and projected to the end of late 2014. The adoption of quantitative forward guidance can provide the Federal Reserve with the needed greater flexibility in achieving its inflation and employment goals on the way to normalization, given the increasing difficulties in measuring the slack of the labor market. And it goes on to say that we will see risks that are unexpectedly rapid and will crash the United States monetary policy if they don't make certain corrections in their monetary policy to stop the inflation. The what we see now is no inflation, or what they say is no inflation, to rapid hyperinflation, and it leads to the risk of disruptions in all of the global financial markets. It says there will be spillovers, as they say, major disruptions in production, transportation, and many other indicators that they list here that could be, a result of the monetary system collapsing. Basically, it would end, trucking across the nation. It would end the chain of supply and demand because the money would not be there to pay the employees or to pay for the products.
Right. And if I can just boast a little bit, if we back up just a tad, okay, we're talking about a change in economic policy here with the U.S. dollar. If you go to silverdoctors.com, and I'm just reporting what I find on various sites that I do visit and look at. Big headline, streaming headline: Jim Willie, Obama was selected to, and this is a direct quote, to kill the dollar. Isn't it funny, folks, when you heard this and when I wrote about this a year and a half ago, people laughed and said, oh, this is just a bunch of hype. Now, Jim Willie comes out a year and a half after I wrote about Obama being selected to kill the dollar.
So he was a selected leader to be put in place when the dollar was killed, because he didn't do anything to kill the dollar. Well, he just happens to be the unlucky guy who's sitting in the puppet chair.
No, it's he. First of all, you've got to have a compliant leader, and then you've got to be able to see. The presidency is not just about who's in the Oval Office; it's about the people he can bring with him. We talked about El-Biari earlier, Mohammed El-Biari. Think about that, the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I believe he was brought in under Bush. Nonetheless, Obama expanded the Muslim Brotherhood influence in the White House. Now, having said that, Obama, it goes even deeper than that. I don't want to cut into the time of our guest. Dave Hodges is on the line, folks. At the beginning of the program, I said I advise everyone to go to thecommonsenseshow.com. That's thecommonsenseshow.com. Dave Hodges has written a series of articles about the CDC, NIH, Bill Gates, Ebola, vaccines, mandatory vaccines, et cetera, folks. I am urging everyone to read the last couple of articles, all of them, but especially the last couple of articles on thecommonsenseshow.com. Dave has done a lot of research, a lot of investigation. It's kind of like, boy, I wish I would have done that. I find myself saying, and when I talked to him earlier, I just had to congratulate him for wonderful exposés and wonderful, just fantastic research that he's done. So with no further ado, let's welcome to the program Mr. Dave Hodges from thecommonsenseshow.com. Dave, welcome, sir.
Hi, guys. Great to be on with both of you, and I wish our topic was a little more optimistic, but we're still continuing to try to do the service of letting people know what challenges that we're facing. And certainly Brzezinski's admonition to his colleagues at Bilderberg in 2011, in which he said people are waking up, we need to accelerate the agenda. They're making good on that promise, guys. We've really got our hands full with what's coming.
Yeah, there's no shortage of threats facing the United States, whether internally or externally, or from our government, or externally from the financial leaders of the world. As we see, the policies are changing, the economic policies are changing. Have you seen the news on this ending of the quantitative easing, Dave?
Yeah, I have, but as long as the Federal Reserve is continuing to take $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities, it's just a backdoor to quantitative easing. It's never. Anytime a friend of the Fed needs money, they just crank up the printing presses. So I think it's a really a facade in terms of a public gesture.
Okay. All right. Well, let's shift gears and get into your specialty here, your research. Folks, prior to the show, we had a conversation, Dave and I had a conversation, and Dave said something, and it kind of struck me as having a ring of truth and a ring of importance to it. And he said, I'm just not sure people are understanding the importance of the information contained in the articles, especially the last couple of articles, the articles about Ebola. And I was reading through the articles, and I'm thinking there should be total outrage, total, not panic, but people should be kind of jumping up and down and saying, hey, what's going on here? So, Dave, set the stage here. Tell us what's going on and what your research has found.
Well, I've been talking about Ebola for some time. It started with the immigration crisis because it was brought to my attention through people such as one of my confidential sources inside DEA. And what we know is that there are 100,000 West Africans, or were at the time that this immigration commenced, that were operating in Central America, and they were drug traffickers. And it just stands to reason, and Border Patrol people that I've talked to have confirmed some of this, that they're going to be crossing the border. Well, at the time, they were coming from the 7-state region in which there was an uncontainable live Ebola outbreak. And Dr. Jane Orient, who's one of our top physicians here in Arizona where I reside, she had, and I had talked privately before she came on my show, and she said she was getting the same thing from her confidential sources. By the way, the Border Patrol's talking, but if they talk publicly, they go to prison. And so they're very, very discreet about who they seek out. I feel fortunate enough that I was sought out, and Dr. Orient has been sought out, and we're getting the same information. The Border Patrol is scared to death of Ebola crossing the border. And we should be, for good reason. So I reported on that, and I just said we have an open border, and we have people from the region. We're certainly open to bioterrorism as a result of this. So it's just an accident waiting to happen. And I've kind of moved away from Ebola, except now and then it's been in the news, and I've read things that I know just aren't right. And I came across an AHA release by the CDC. And I have friends who listen to my show that are nurses and doctors. And a couple of days ago, I started getting scanned copies on my email of CDC distributions on how to prepare for an Ebola outbreak. And to the best of my knowledge, I've heard from people in 11 states, so I have to believe they distributed this to all 50 states. The CDC, and I've got one of the scanned representations of how to don an Ebola prevention suit, a hazmat suit, and that's in yesterday's article at thecommonsenseshow.com, and I've got this scanned notice, and it just had come out 12 hours prior to me publishing the article, and I jumped on this, and I said, we got to get this out here, because the CDC, who was conspicuously absent at the border during the immigration outbreak and TB, drug-resistant TB and scabies and all those things that have hit the Border Patrol agents, I said, well, here comes Ebola. And the CDC is clearly telling us to prepare for a pandemic. So I wrote the first article. It was fairly well received, but not to the degree that I thought it would be. And I'm not putting my ego in this, guys. I'm talking about what are the greatest threats to public health, and people should pay attention to some of the things, and people should pay big attention to the Ebola things. So I was doing more research late last night, and I had an aha moment, and it's just one of those things that we've all experienced where we come across publicly available information that just knocks you on your backside. And this is what I found. And as a result, I wrote an article entitled, the CDC, the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health, and Bill Gates own the patents on both Ebola as an illness and the related vaccines. And this is where...
folks, let that sink in. I don't mean to interrupt, Dave, but folks, let that sink in. I mean, think about that. They own the patents for the virus and the vaccine.
The CDC, and I have the patent in today's article at thecommonsenseshow.com, and I just read the title, and the patent number is CA2241523A1. A is in Able. And I have a copy of the impression of the patent, and it's owned by the CDC, and they own Ebola and any strain of Ebola that's within 70% of the original Ebola virus. So any mutated strain, you'll assume, will be within 70%. In fact, actually, it'll be within 95%. They own all Ebola as an illness. That's the CDC. This is why, in my estimation, the CDC is bringing in people from foreign countries who are Americans with the Ebola virus because they can claim intellectual property over the treatment. And they get to hone in on any treatment, and they can demand royalties from simply treating the illness. But it gets worse, my friends, because now we have an announcement, first of all, that Bill Gates is putting $50 million into Ebola vaccines. Well, that doesn't sound terribly disturbing, except you have to go to a website that I found last night at 1 o'clock Pacific in the morning. I didn't get to bed until 3. I had just one of those aha moments, got a rush of adrenaline, and I couldn't walk away. I came across a related website to the NIH and the fact that they own the Ebola vaccines. And I want people to hear this clearly. On one hand, you've got the CDC that owns Ebola, the illness, and all related strains. On the other hand, you've got the National Institute of Health with Bill Gates as the primary investor, who has put $560 million, not just the $50 million. I found evidence he's put $560 million into this project. Now, the work is being done by a laboratory that's called Crucell, and that's spelled Crucell. And if you put this in to Google search engine, you'll find it. This is publicly available. This isn't unnamed sources or leaked CIA documents. This is right there for the world to see. And let me read to you just a couple of the things that are on Crucell's website. First of all, it says Crucell is developing an Ebola vaccine in collaboration with the Vaccine Research Center. By the way, they're controlled by NIH. And we're also connected to the National Institute of Health, and we're also connected to Army Research Labs. They're all part of this. Now, let me get down to the nitty-gritty here. That statement was made in 2004. This gets scary. This sent chills up my spine. It takes a lot to knock me off my center of gravity because we see so much every day. But this was the one that really sent me for a loop. Crucell's Ebola vaccine, the ones tasked with developing it, entered phase 1 clinical trials in the third quarter of 2006. So everything that we're reading in the media right now about developing a vaccine, it's all smoke and mirrors. Folks, it's already been done. I've got the smoking gun right here. It says the clinical trials were commenced in the third quarter of 2006. 2 groups of 16 volunteers, we're talking human, we're not talking primates now, we're talking humans, were enrolled and vaccinated. The study showed safety and what they call, excuse my stuttering here on the medical term, immunogenicity. The doses were evaluated and successfully administered. In other words, the people did not reject the medication. In October of 2008, Crucell secured a National Institute of Health award to advance the development of Ebola and Marburg vaccines with the ultimate aim of developing a multivariant anti-flavorous vaccine. Plain language, as I had someone explain it to me this morning in the wee hours when I woke them up, they said Any strain of Ebola is covered under this. That's the fancy language. So They announced the fact that they were doing this Crucell laboratory in 2004. In 2006, they do the clinical trials, and they say they met with some success, although they don't give you a lot of detail. In 2008, they got a huge monetary award from NIH to continue. And we know that Bill Gates has thrown in $50 million of seed money, but there's also a group that's going to be administering these vaccines, and they're called the Global Fund. And the Global Fund is going to be like the vaccine center of the world. And guys, I can't believe that no one else has come across this, or if they have, my apologies, I haven't seen it. The Global Fund, which I hypertext linked to in the article, it's a real existing entity, and they're going to be in charge of HIV vaccines that Bill Gates and friends have given to, tuberculosis vaccines, and the third one now is Ebola vaccines. And this is who Bill Gates gave the $560 million to. Now, let's use a little common sense here. Bill Gates is giving $560 million. He's going to expect a return on investment. He's a businessman. He's probably a trillionaire by this point in his life. If you vaccinate everybody in the world, that $560 million is chump change. It's absolutely nothing. And so we look at the fact that now we have not just the genesis of who owns the vaccine, the genesis of who owns the illness. Now I've got named here the distribution company. Who's going to be distributing this? Now, with all these major players involved in this Ebola equation that's coalescing together in this dot connecting exercise, I would venture to say it's going to be mandatory. In fact, Doug, as I shared with you this afternoon, and I'm not going to provide personally identifiable information, but I have two long-term friends high up in law enforcement. Greg Evenson, 5 years ago on my show, and I consider Greg to be a very credible source. Greg Evenson, former Kansas State Patrol officer, highly decorated, came on my show and validated these facts after I made them public. During the height of the H1N1 scare, there were several states, not just the ones I had contact in, that practiced DUI kind of roadblock stops, but it was for vaccines. And they played with a scanner that would detect whether or not you've taken a vaccine. And if you had not taken the vaccine, they would give you an opportunity to do so when you were being detained. If you did, then they just processed your paperwork and sent you on your way. If you refused, and let's say you had your family with you, the men would go on one bus and presumably go to a location, and they didn't practice it out that far, but this was the drill. The women would go yet on another bus, and then the children would go on a third bus. So they were going to segregate families by age and by gender. And they also had, as a mechanism here, a two-tiered system of intercept. They would have the regular roadblock, the tent, the vans that had the equipment to do what they wanted done, but they also had another tier of chase cars. So as people see the traffic backing up and they go, oh, I've heard about this, I don't want to be a part of it, and people try to U-turn and make a run for it, the chase cars would run them down. And they drilled this effectively during the height of the H1N1 scare, and the country thought we were headed towards mandatory vaccinations as the National Guard, and several healthcare workers around the country, mostly nurses, were forced to take the vaccine. Well, public outcry, I thought, pushed this back. I don't really believe that now. I think what pushed it back is this was only a beta test for what's coming. Back in May, when I first heard, or in June, I should say, when I first dealt with the Ebola situation at our border and the potential for bioterrorism, I contacted my law enforcement sources, and I said, and I talked to them again this morning, and I said, tell me what's going on. And I talked to one of the two, I should say, this morning to be accurate. And they both said pretty much the same thing. We get periodic updates from DHS telling us to keep these protocol training measures on file and ready to implement at a moment's notice should we have any kind of health care problem, such as a pandemic. And I'm paraphrasing what I was told, But effectively what they're saying is what you guys practiced 4 or 5 years ago needs to stay on the books, and you need to be prepared to enact this. And this is exactly what Greg Evenson confirmed on my show. These two people I have known, well, let's just say I'm afraid of identifying them. Let's just say I know them and their families intimately well. There's a 100% confidence call on this information. And I have another piece of information, too, that really starts to tie this together. This is a backdoor way into martial law. I had a conversation with my very, very best military source about this. And actually, we've had 2 conversations. And what he told me is there is major grumblings in the ranks of the leadership of the military again, and he expects many more purges because DHS, in times of a pandemic, has been given operational authority over the military. In other words, they'll direct the military where to go and what their operational procedures and guidelines will be. And obviously that doesn't set well with the military to be taking orders from a civilian organization such as DHS. And it's also a backdoor into martial law. And what I mean by the backdoor into martial law, it's this. When soldiers are deployed to the streets and they're told to detain people and they know there's a health crisis, they're going to be thinking they're acting in the public interest. But it's actually a backdoor to martial law. The police will be involved. The police will be conscripted, and they'll be involved, and they'll all be thinking they're working to save the public health and save lives, when in effect they're really operating as a martial law force. Travel's restricted, you're quarantining areas, you've got all the essential elements of martial law. This is how my source, my military source, the one who brought me the fact that there was almost a coup over Ambassador Stevens' assassination. He was the one who identified General Ham for me and Admiral Guyette, and I wrote that story, not to toot my horn, but I was months ahead of most other people on that.
Yes, you were.
It's the same source that brought me that information is bringing me this, Doug. And this is a backdoor into martial law, and Ebola is the key. Now, I've also been told we're going to have related terrorist attacks at the same time to make people run to the government for protection, and I think you've got good information on that side, much better than what I've got.
Well, Dave, first of all, thank you for that. The scenario with respect to Ebola, it's much deeper. I do have information about the other side of this. However, your side here, I think it's so important for people to really grasp the enormity of this. Folks, we're talking back in August. In fact, I just went to the website that you referenced within your article, and folks, definitely go to thecommonsenseshow.com, read Dave Hodges' articles concerning Ebola, but I went to, Crucell, and going back to August 9th of 2006, where the Gates Fund, the Gates Foundation, where they promised $500 million, $500 million. This is it's breathtaking. Of course, as you point out, in the larger sense, if you take a step back, it is chump change when you're talking about the billions of people, 6 billion people, or just even people within the United States to be vaccinated. I was astounded when you had laid this all out for me, and I didn't. You know what? I did not make the connections that you made, and I just want to just commend you on the connections that you've made. Folks, it's imperative that you read and understand what Dave is saying. Go ahead, sir.
Well, the other thing that I wrote this week that I think it definitely relates, but it shows how dire this threat is. First of all, let me point out the obvious. You have American healthcare workers in foreign countries. Americans are the best in the world at hazmat procedures. Our emergency procedures medically in this country are second to none in the world. We're still number one. And you have people in these hazmat suits who are supposed to be protected from Ebola 9 times Sunday coming down with the Ebola virus and being brought into the country. And that means the Ebola is getting through these suits. Now, let me read to you something here very briefly, but I wrote this on September 13th on my website, still on the front page. In 2009, a Canadian research team from the National Center for Foreign Animal Disease and Canadian Food Inspection Agency, headed by Carissa Embry-Hyatt, began conducting research entitled The Transmission of Ebola Virus from Pigs to Non-Human Primates. So in other words, we're talking pigs to monkeys. And what they found in this study, and this is public information, I link to it, and you go right to that Canadian government health website. So this isn't Dave Hodges interpreting information. This is the information that is there. And what they said is that these pigs that are involved in this, let me go back and look at this here again. Okay, pigs to non-human primates, meaning monkeys. The pigs are transmitting the Ebola virus through airborne means. This is what they concluded. This is 2009. This is 5 years ago. And yet we got the CDC perpetuating the myth that the only way you can get Ebola is through bodily fluid contact. Well, I submit to you that these American workers that are becoming infected couldn't possibly have bodily fluid contact with someone who's afflicted. So you've got to begin to look for other means of transmission, and I think I've just pointed out what this is. But it even gets more disturbing. This report goes further. This is why you can't contain the disease or the virus in Africa. It's uncontainable, and here's why. If you just had bodily fluid contact and you had an outbreak in an area, you simply quarantine the area, and then you go piecemeal through the area geographically and isolate those that need to be isolated, and then isolate everybody for 21 days, and if people aren't symptomatic, you let them go, but don't let them come back in the area. This is not a hard procedure to follow, but this is why that procedure will not work, and that's standard procedure, by the way, here in the United States as well with DHS and FEMA. The reason this won't work is because they found the Ebola virus in this same report lives inside the pigs. And what they don't know is if it lives inside other food stores as well. So they said, here you have people in the African bush eating a bush pig. In other words, a wild pig. They go out and they bow and arrow it, they throw spears through it, they shoot it, and then they barbecue the pig and have Ebola pig. And this is how some of them are contracting Ebola. This is what this 2009 report says. If it's in the food supply, gentlemen, you can't stop it because the pigs aren't going to obey quarantine boundaries, and guards aren't going to be under orders to shoot to kill animals. You can't contain this. This is so serious. In fact, this article might be the most important of the ones I've written because it definitely shows, it doesn't show this. It doesn't show that humans can get Ebola through airborne means. But my question is, as a trained researcher, why not? If you can have one mammal, a pig, give it to another mammal, a monkey, then why can't this jump to humans? You're already seeing cross-species contamination. Why can't it cross over into humans? And I think this is what the CDC already knows, and this is how these healthcare workers in Africa are being affected.
Well, that certainly makes sense. And tell me again, Dave, and sorry if I sound like I'm ignorant to this fact, but why are they bringing the afflicted, the infected, back to the United States? Tell me what sense that makes, and tell me again why, according to your research, the answer to that question.
Well, I have to use common sense. Pardon the pun here in the research, but I do. If the CDC owns Ebola, and that's clear, I've got the patents listed on my article. If they own Ebola and you bring an American back inside the United States and the patent is good inside the United States, therefore you own the Ebola virus that's in the person. Ergo, any movement to treat the Ebola, you have to compensate the holder of the disease. It's intellectual property. It's physical property. The Ebola virus is owned wholly by the CDC. So if you bring in, let's say, the XYZ serum to treat it, you would have to get permission from the CDC because they own the Ebola. So before you could do anything that could affect their property, they have to give permission. Cha-ching, do you hear the cash registers going off?
Yeah, but wouldn't that, conversely, or alternatively, wouldn't that be the same with the exportation of the serum that would be used to treat the Ebola, let's say, in another country? I'm just trying to follow this. I mean, I understand that part, but if we took the same, and I'll use the word serum, I don't know what else to use, to treat the Ebola in Africa, wouldn't that have the same cash implications or not?
Not unless the World Health Organization's on board, and that's the part that I'm working on piecing together. If you're issued a patent, that patent is only good inside the United States. That's why they're bringing these people back in. They want Ebola. They want to partner with anyone who's treating. You see, look at this as a joint venture. Okay, what you have are the procurement agents in the CDC. Let's bring Ebola to the country through any means possible. Okay, and they're going to partner. Their financial remuneration comes from the treatment. Well, who owns the treatment? Another government agency, NIH. Yeah. They are partners. Now, who's funding this to a large extent? A man named Bill Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's your triumvirate. But let's add in one other thing. Did you know the Army Research Labs are involved? I think I mentioned that. They're involved in the vaccine process. When you go to Crusel's website, the ones who have been working on the vaccine, they mention the Army Infectious Disease Research Laboratories as being involved with them. And let's go back to a rumor that I'm sure you guys have heard. 1977, the Army in their helicopters drop Ebola on villages in Zaire. Did you ever hear that argument? In fact, we saw that portrayed in the movie Outbreak in the beginning scene.
Yes. And in my, or what I have here, it was 1976. However, I'll defer to you in the 77.
You might be right. I might have been off a year. But I'm looking at this now, guys, and I'm dead certain that I've just given you the players who stand to make all this money on Ebola. Now, Bill Gates is heavily tied in to the World Health Organization. I watched a speech last night at about 2:30 a.m. while I could still stay conscious when Linda Gates was addressing the WHO in a meeting at the United Nations. And she didn't get specific as to illnesses and organisms, but she said, we can really work on this and partner and treat these illnesses. And I think it was a pep talk to the WHO to get on board with what's going on. That's how I took it.
Well, okay. Would this be a depopulation initiative as well?
Well, I think so. And the reason I say that is because when you look at let's go back to the H1N1. Okay, I think this was the beta test. When you break down that vaccine that was hastily put together, they had an element in the vaccine designed to create more volume of vaccine. It's kind of like putting water in an alcoholic drink. You make a small drink filled with alcohol go to a larger size that'll fit a shot glass with water. Well, this is the purpose that something called adjuvants serves in a vaccine. You put adjuvants in a vaccine, it's a filler designed to create more volume. The problem is with that filler, the adjuvants, as we later learned, were filled with MF59 and squalene. And both of those properties serve to destroy the central nervous system. It destroys your immune system. What it does is, over time, the vaccine eats away at your immune system, and it makes you open to opportunistic viruses and diseases, not necessarily H1N1 or even Ebola, but anything, because your immune system's compromised. I expect that this Ebola vaccine is going to be as deadly as the Ebola itself. It'll just be, let's say, longer acting. I mean, if you took Ebola and you have the 5-day, or you have the 5-day to 21-day incubation period, and then you take the vaccine, and if you had the same reaction, everybody'd start refusing to take the vaccine. But if the vaccine is more slow-acting over time, let's say 3, 6 months, 2, 4, 5 years out before it does its full damage, then you're going to get more public acceptance of taking the vaccine. So I don't think we're going to see you take the vaccine and you instantly drop. I do think what we're going to see is people take the vaccine and they're open for another more opportunistic viruses down the road. That's what I think is coming in this vaccine.
And Dave, before the break here, I'm looking at an article from Foreign Policy, and this is from September 10th, and they're talking about implementing a medical NATO team through the World Health Organization, declaring a state of emergency. The medical NATO teams would be inserted into countries to provide Ebola drugs without consent of the governments.
If you go back to the articles I wrote in June of this year, one of the things that I speculated on, I said, I want to know why these UN vehicles are in the country. Do you guys remember that? And we were seeing UN vehicles being shipped all around the country. And at the same time, the Border Patrol were telling their confidential sources, and we were all talking about it, that Ebola is a risk. And I speculated in an article that I published where I said, I can foresee the UN coming in after an outbreak in which hospital emergency rooms are overwhelmed, you can't get in to see your doctor, the minute clinics are filled, people are sent home, the UN will come in, set up these base camps of treatment facilities, and they'll appear to be the good guys in blue helmets. And then I said I could foresee on the heels of this a backdoor into martial law. Well, now that we know that DHS is going to be calling the shots and enlisting the police and the military to affect quarantine procedures and vaccination procedures, I think my instincts in June were probably pretty close to accurate. And so, Joe, back to what you said about that report in Foreign Policy, I think we're already seeing the manifestation of that right now. It's being put into play as we speak.
Absolutely, and they go on to state that the World Health Organization would issue a global health emergency. They would follow the guidelines of the UN humanitarian goals, and these medical NATO teams would be inserted into the countries where the disease is prevalent without the authority of the governments, and they would be equipped with weapons, protective gear, and the ability to distribute the vaccine or treatment that they see, and also be able to fight any external forces, as it states in this article.
And see, that's a catch term, isn't it? What are external forces? Could that be military units that aren't on board with the subjugation of this country?
Wow. Okay.
And I've predicted that. You know, if you look at the Milgram compliance study from the 60s that measured how many people would put someone to death with minimal authority over them, in other words, guns not to their head, just minimal authority, Milgram found 2 out of 3 people, and that research has been duplicated, so that number runs between 65 and about 75%. I think we can apply those numbers. In fact, I wrote an article this last week entitled The Psychological Reasons Why U.S. Soldiers Will Fire on U.S. Citizens. And I quoted some of these numbers. These compliance studies, whether there's Solomon Ash study or the Zimbardo fake prison study out of Stanford or the Milgram study, all have pretty much the same numbers in terms of compliance rates. But also inside the compliance rates are the non-compliance rates. So you could have anywhere between about 20% to about 35% of the military saying, we're not on board with this. And I think you'd see a greater number in the police where there's really less external force placed upon you to comply as you would find in the military. So you're going to find a sizable contingency inside our military that once they figure out this is a big scam, they're going to stop complying. And this is what I think that phrase means, to fight against outside forces. I think I've just told you what the outside force is.
And I think you're right on the money with that, Dave. I've got to tell you, looking at this, and folks, you've got to go to thecommonsenseshow.com and look at the 2 articles, at least the 2 articles that are being referenced here in this conversation, to really get a full understanding. And by the way, follow the links as well, the citations that back up the claims that the assessments that Mr. Hodges is making. And I think you'll find that none of this, we've been accused, Dave, of fear-mongering and saying, oh, this is, accused of making something huge out of something that it's
I know,
not.
I know, Doug. I actually started one of my articles out this week, and I said I've been accused of fear-mongering on the Ebola virus. Well, I have a new partner. It's called the CDC, and I referenced the fact that they sent out these protocols on how to treat Ebola. Why would they send that to every emergency room in the country, all these doctors and nurses, unless they knew something was coming? That makes no sense unless they know the jig is up and Ebola is on its way or maybe even possibly here. Fear-mongering. People can say what they want, but you raised a good point. Go to the articles and click on the hypertext links, but do it quickly because, Doug, I'm sure you and Joe have found this. We'll break a story, and within a week they've changed the link, and they've made it go dead.
Yes.
I experience that quite a bit.
And of course, you're very high profile, and of course we are as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, certainly download the information both from Mr. Hodges' website, but also the citations, the links. One final question. I know and thank you for being generous with your time, but why Bill and Melinda Gates? I know that sounds weird, academic.
I think I can answer that, but I want to say something really quick as an aside.
Sure.
And I'm going to answer that question. If you really want to know the A to Z on the recent Ebola crisis, and I don't have all of it, but I have a good portion of it, if you go to my search engine at the top of my website and just write in Ebola, you can kind of read the history of how it's evolved, and you'll see my thought processes as I've uncovered information at each step. And people will see my thought process on how I arrived at the conclusions I have. Although people today, in today's article, these aren't conclusions, these are facts. You have a conspiracy. It's Hegelian dialectic designed to bring Ebola to the country, release it in some form. They have the cure, quote unquote, and they own the vaccine that's going to make the money, and they're clearly going to make it mandatory. Now, back to your question about Bill Gates and why Bill Gates. I have to put my speculation hat on because I'm not privy to those kinds of meetings or inside information. But let's just look at how Bill Gates made his money. He made his money in computers. And what's really at the heart of the police state surveillance grid, if you took away all computers, you wouldn't have much of a police state surveillance grid. You'd have to do it the old East German Stasi way and hire people in the next door apartment to spy on their neighbors. But right now, it's all electronic, it's all computers. Well, who started all this process? Who built the back doors into Microsoft and all the Microsoft-related programs? Well, it's Bill Gates. So he became a player in a very major way in the police state surveillance grid that permeates basically the Western democracies. And so why Bill Gates? Well, he's made more money than God. And he's had this fascination with vaccines since day one. In fact, in one article that I read last night and didn't include it because it wasn't relevant, he said he wants to vaccinate every child in the world for polio with a vaccine. Every child. Boy, that's a lucrative business. So he is the major player in this. This is like, Rockefeller and Rothschild, they run the banks. This guy, he runs the vaccine business. And
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it, it's just a compartmentalized aspect of this. Now, if we trace this far enough, we're probably going to find bank involvement. Who's bankrolling, outside of Gates, who's bankrolling some of these operations besides Bill Gates? I suspect, as I continue to dig in this, I'm going to find the old reliables like Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, the bad boys from Basel. That's where I think this is headed, because I don't think Bill Gates is funding the entire operation. He's the front man for the operation. He's the one that gets the publicity when he does $50 million here. In fact, in the article, it's a PBS release that says he's donating $50 million to fight against Ebola. And then I found another one that says, well, it's actually $560 million to the foundation that's going to basically be disseminating the vaccine. So he's your major face of this operation, but he's certainly not the only player. And I do think Bill Gates probably answers to a higher authority.
I think you're right.
And
wow.
So, guys, we're in a lot of trouble. I don't know if they're going to release Ebola segmentedly, in this country in small pockets and call it a major pandemic when it's really not, or are they going to just let it sweep across the country like we saw in the movie Outbreak? I don't know what form it's going to take, but I can tell you that these men aren't putting this kind of money into these ventures unless they're expecting to get a return on investment. And so, therefore, how do you get the return on investment with Ebola? Well, you vaccinate people. It's going to be mandatory. There's going to be vaccine, DUI kind of roadblocks. They're going to stop you, and they're going to detain you and send you to a camp if you refuse to take the vaccine.
Yeah, awkward silence because of just think about the implications there.
And we see a headline today, dozens of children feared dead after being injected with tainted vaccine from the World Health Organization. As many as 36 children had died unexpectedly in Syria from a UN-sponsored program in Syria. This is a small, we've seen the STDs that were released in the 60s in vaccines. There are a lot of nefarious people, as you said, Dave, with motives, financial and control, motives that are working behind the scenes to implement this strategy to get the World Bank, the UN, the World Health Organization involved in combining their authority for international operations beyond any scope of sovereignty of government.
Let me give you another one. I think one of the skills I picked up from coaching college basketball was a big part of your job is to scout your opponent, both video scouting and in-person scouting. And you do so to try to not just know what their strategy is, but how they're going to react in certain situations. And so you're kind of ready for that. And I like to apply that thinking to this. I've been thinking, what if we were able, the Hagmann report, and then you've got the Common Sense show, and we're able to wake a lot of people up, and it's, heck no, we're not taking vaccines, and we're in the streets protesting. You know what I would do if I were them? And I have a hard time saying this because I'm a nonviolent person, but knowing how they think and what low regard they have for human life, what if chemtrails turned into an Ebola drop? You just fly over a major metropolitan area and start spraying out the chemtrails, and you mix in Ebola with it. Think how the other side thinks, guys. That's not how Dave Hodges and Doug and Joe Hagmann approach life, but you can't tell me that the other side doesn't have that kind of depraved indifference towards humanity.
No, you're exactly right, Dave. I've even seen different papers and theories of how the chemtrails are one part of the equation when introduced to another chemical, a dormant chemical that is inside our body from the chemtrails becomes active, and the two chemicals combine to create some kind of pandemic. And there's a working theory that somebody had going, but it's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, like a reagent. But I think they certainly could be multi-purpose. Dave, I think you brought up a good point there. We've got to start thinking outside of the box when we're dealing with these potential scenarios. We cannot think like normal human beings. We've got to think like these, but these bastards that we're dealing with, the enemy. I'm sorry to say this, but you're looking at a very nefarious, very evil at its core plan, evil people, evil agenda. Man, oh man.
Let me give you another one here, and this is probably even more realistic than chemtrails. About 2 years ago, I came across a DARPA release, and they actually have the video, and I've written about it on my website. And I have this video that shows a drone that can drop 100,000 little drones, and they're called micro aerial vehicles. And one drone can drop up to 100,000. They're the size of small birds or small insects, but they can intercommunicate with each other. They can apply lethal force. They can work on separate missions or holistically on one mission. And the DARPA video says up to 100,000 from one drone. And I want you just to imagine for a second, you wouldn't even have to risk the bad guy's health on the other side from dropping this. You simply just fly a drone, let's say over Sacramento, California, and you release these 100,000 micro aerial vehicles, and their mission is to release Ebola. you could infect the whole city, within a matter of hours. That technology is here right now today. And people can look that up, micro aerial vehicles from drones. And you can actually put it in the Common Sense Show, and you'll probably come to the article where I have a video of it.
Yeah, in fact, I've seen that, and you were I think, Dave, you were the first one to introduce me to that terminology, MAVs or micro aerial vehicles. It's almost incomprehensible, as you point out, but nonetheless, we've got to take a look and think this way and think about
Ebola too is 90% lethal. Don't believe the 60% figures you're reading out of Africa. We have 30 years of documentation said it's 90%. So
you're not the only one to say that.
Let's say you send in the micro area vehicles and you wipe out a good portion of a major city like Oklahoma City or Sacramento. They also now have these drone robots, and they're like bears. First of all, they're almost impervious to destruction. You'd have to have a 12 gauge right next to them just about to take them out. They can run 30 miles an hour, and I've got a video on that in the same article I wrote about DARPA technology. And I could see these guys being the cleanup forces. So, okay, again, I'm going to put on my coach's hat, and I'm going to think like the other side. I would do a micro-aerial vehicle attack if the folks were up in arms, they're not going to take the vaccines. Fine, we'll just depopulate the area. You send in the micro-aerial vehicles, you're going to have a 10 to 12% survival rate. So then you let loose the robots, and the robots come in as a cleansing force. And we know from the research that these robots not only follow program directions, they no longer have to be controlled by a guy with a joystick at headquarters, because the new artificial intelligence allows them to make up their own mission initiatives as the situations change. So they're the smart robots. They have facial recognition capability, and they have weapons capability. These could be the follow-ups that would come into a metropolitan area and basically cleanse the city of any survivors. And people say, that's right out of science fiction. Yeah, it is. And where do you think science fiction gets some of these ideas?
Absolutely right. And I got a question for you, a hypothetical question, Dave. Could we be witnessing we saw that Bush used an executive order to authorize apprehension and detention of individuals who possibly could transmit or spread communicable diseases. Obama expanded on that and said basically any respiratory illness, you could be quarantined. Are we witnessing a real or manufactured danger from Ebola when at a time when we see what's going on with the economy? I mean, how could this tie into a dollar collapse or a dollar value change to where the people would be sidetracked?
You have 10% of the country that has reactive air disease, or most commonly called asthma. And you come and round those people up. I mean, asthma, I've read an analysis of what you're talking about, Joe, and some scholars have said, if you have asthma, if you have an upper respiratory infection, albeit temporary, you still would qualify to be quarantined.
You know what, Dave,
I look at this as a potential political isolation tool. In other words, how do we get the dissidents out of our society? This is, I think, the beginnings of a red list.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and now I'm a little bit concerned. Okay, I had a doctor's appointment this morning, and I usually don't share my personal stuff on air, okay? And the nurse handed me my chart. Now, this is all electronic now, where before it was on paper, and you can make notes and make changes, make erasures or whatever. And you would think you could do this electronically. She handed me my electronic chart, kind of like on an iPad-type device, and listed on my list of afflictions, guess what was on there? Asthma.
Oh, boy.
And I've never had asthma. So I asked the nurse, I said, where did this come from? She said, I don't know. You were diagnosed with it. And I said, no, I wasn't. She said, you've got asthma. I said, I don't have asthma. And this is a true story, Dave. So the doctor came in, and I said, look, doc, do I have asthma? And you just didn't, forgot to tell me. He said, no, I don't think so. Well, it's on my chart. Can you remove that from my chart? He said, I can't remove that from your chart. I said, well, wait a minute, you're the doctor. Who puts it on there? Who could remove it? Well, it's got to go through, and it's actually a larger medical board that has to approve the charting process. I know it does not make sense. It didn't make sense to me. But so what you're saying, though, now I'm concerned.
Well, I'll go a step further. You know, your medical records go directly to the IRS now, electronically. That's from Obamacare. That's Obamacare legislation. So let's just say that you don't have to have a human analyst do this. You can simply cross-check and program your computers. So here's our dissident list: Hodges, Hagmann, Quayle, Zelensky. So you go down the list and you go, okay, name all the dissident lists that have asthma. Oh, bingo. Okay, let's go get them. That's simple, guys.
And what better way to implement a full-scale change from the way they do the health records to, mobilized electronic health records, which is what their ultimate goal is, through some kind of RFID chip.
I think I have seasonal asthma, and I grew up with it. I played college basketball. Obviously, it's not a factor in my life. I've always controlled it through medication and avoiding certain foods. But I'm on the list. I'm a quarantined guy, and I don't think this is by accident. This legislation wasn't made for Dave Hodges, but it was made for all the Dave Hodgeses out there. And they're going to basically quarantine you for anything where they think you can get a swath of the population. So it stands to reason if the general population has a 10% asthma rate, you'd stand to reason that your dissident list for DHS would also have a 10% asthma rate. So right there,
wow.
You have 10% of your dissidents. And now you get into, well, gee, you go to your doctor, and what were your symptoms? I'm congested. I got a horrible chest cold. Oh, guess what? That goes to the IRS. 72 hours later, you got a knock on the door, and you're packing your bag. I mean, this is why they wrote the legislation this way. I mean, I think this is a really simple conclusion to make. When I first heard that under Obamacare, your medical records go to the IRS, I was thinking, why? Why would Obamacare care about that? And I started thinking, well, if they start passing quarantine legislation against people, and I thought this before what, Joey, you mentioned came out, I said I could see how they could cut a swath out of the dissident movement. And sure enough, here it is. Why do they have to quarantine people with asthma? What possible threat could you pose? Asthma is not contagious.
They talk about all their technology and rapid detection of disease methods that they would employ, and that's contrary to what we see with these executive orders. Being put in some kind of detention or containment when they state they have the ability to, rapidly detect these diseases through population centers. Very quickly.
We are a hop, skip, and a jump away from the following. They are trying to get people to use their iris scan to access their portable bank accounts, at the ATM machines. And what they want to translate the technology into, and this is in DHS documents that I've read. This isn't hearsay information. Then they want to transfer that technology into law enforcement bioscan. So they come to your door, are you Dave Hodges? And they scan you. They got you right there with your iris. And on the iris, they link into your records. It's like your thumbprint. And now they see, oh, okay, you've got this, and you've got that, and you've got that. Come with me, sir. You have to be quarantined.
Wow.
That we're not far away from that. The precursor to this, I think we have to have a national ID card before this takes place. I think this will be implemented under national ID cards. And let's just say we have a terrorist incident again. Well, gee, if we had the iris, these people couldn't fake their ID cards and have done these acts of terrorism. So everyone has to get their iris on their biometric national ID card. And that's clearly where this is headed. And, oh, by the way, let me mention something for people who may not be students of history. National ID cards are a really, really bad idea. They precede gun confiscation. And there were 17 genocides in the 20th century. and all of them were preceded by gun confiscation, and about a third of them were preceded by national ID cards like Rwanda, Nazi Germany, the J stamp, and also some pockets in Russia. So when we look at these precedents in history for national ID cards, it's a really bad idea, but I do think the biometric scans are going to be a form of national ID.
And the Real ID Act was passed in 2005, and they're implementing this by the end of 2016. The DHS is.
But here in Arizona, it's voluntary. I looked into. I had one of my readers contact me through my website, and he said, I went to DMV. They told me today that I was getting enhanced. They call it an enhanced ID. And he said, I looked into what an enhanced ID was. He goes, it's national ID under DHS. And they will mail your ID in 2 weeks. And I had some other people, after I wrote about it, said, well, it's voluntary. So I wrote this guy back an email, and I said, did you get an option to do this? He said, no. He said, they told me you are doing it.
Yeah.
And so
they say
the process is already starting. They're already bringing us into this system. And it's not just, here's what I found out, it's not just the national ID card. They have plans to link it into global identification.
Absolutely. And the from the Homeland Security's own Real ID fact page, it says that this Real ID Act covers 56 jurisdictions, including all 50 states and territories of the U.S., and it will be enacted, and it establishes minimum standards for state-issued driver's license and identification cards, and it's going to implement what they've put in passports, which is the chip, the RFID chip. And there are, if you go to homelandsecurity.com and just look up the Real ID Act, you can find the latest information.
Or .gov, I think you mean.
Yeah, all this stuff is here. Yeah, but I'm going to go one real freaky thing on you before I go. You guys understand, I'm sure you do, that your emotional temperament can be altered through electronic means. We've known that since 1961 on the early experiments of Jose Delgado, who went to work for the CIA. And then we know that your heart works on these frequencies too. And they tell people with pacemakers and bad hearts, stay away from things like microwave ovens and stuff like that because of the electro frequencies. Here's how they can kill you. And this caught me off guard, and I went and did some research on this, and I haven't written on it yet, but I probably will. You're on the smart grid. You come in, and now everything you say is surveilled. And gentlemen, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but any signal coming into your house, any kind of electrical signal, can be piggybacked for surveillance. Are you guys aware of that?
Aware of it, and shall we say we used it.
Okay, so your light bulbs that are turned on, your TV, your radio, your toaster oven, if it's got that I forget the name of it, UV something code that ties into the smart grid. All your electronic appliances now have to be smart grid compliant, and that's federal law. Yep. And that's why we went from analog to digital and TV recently. Okay, so you're completely surveilled as you enter your house in this smart grid system. And you start talking negatively about this and that. The technology exists now from a smart meter to change the electromagnetic frequency of your entire structure, link into other electrical devices, and create such an intense electromagnetic wave it can induce a heart attack. I think this is how Andrew Breitbart was killed. But right now, they have the ability to assassinate people in smart grid homes. Now, smart grids aren't fully installed across the country yet. We're on our way. But they have the ability to kill you if you're in a smart grid by inducing a heart attack. Are you guys aware of that?
Yep. Yes, and all they have to do is alter the frequency or alter the wave. I'm not exactly certain of the terminology, but yes, they can take something passive, make it active, and zap you basically.
Well, this is worse. Everything we've talked about tonight, I think, is worse than anything that George Orwell could have imagined.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you on that.
We are living an absolute nightmare, and I do believe, I don't know if we're in the end times, and we're going to see the second coming and the Antichrist, all the stuff that comes with the end times. I don't know. I mean, the Bible says we shall not know the hour of the day, so I don't presume to try to guess. But the way things are progressing, the other side has such formidable technology, right, from the micro-area vehicles to the super robots that can make up their own missions, to the smart grids that can kill you after they listen to every word you say. They're even working on mind-reading devices at the airports that'll soon probably come into the smart grid system in your house. We're overwhelmed, and we're outnumbered. And I really think that the only thing that will save humanity is the return of Jesus Christ. I think we're almost helpless.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Dave. God bless you, my friend. I just agree with you so much. I don't think how can we possibly turn this around?
There's one way, and I don't like military coups because they usually end badly. Our only chance in America is for our military to rise up and do the right thing.
Again, that awkward silence is deliberate because, wow, think about that.
You know, we missed an opportunity in Benghazi. If you could imagine for a second, if General Ham, the head of AFRICOM, and the commander of Carrier Task Force 3, Admiral Guyette, had combined their forces as they were working towards doing and hadn't been stopped by the CIA, they would have rescued Stevens. Stevens would have known then, oh, gee, I'm getting exposed for running guns to Al-Qaeda and now the Syrian rebels, and I'm facilitating this through drug trafficking and child sex trafficking, and they wanted to wipe me out before the election so these things don't follow Obama into the campaign. And that's why I think he was killed. That's why my military sources think he was killed. Can you imagine what a singing goose they would have had in Chris Stevens? You couldn't have kept him out of all the media, and here this guy's protected by the military. This could have led to a real military coup against this White House. Hillary Clinton goes to jail, Panetta goes to jail, Obama goes to jail, you know, and we probably would have had a civil war. And as bad as I think a civil war will be, a civil war would be preferable compared to the society that the globalists have planned for us.
I totally agree with you on that. For a lot of reasons, but yeah, I agree with you on that. Well, Dave, my friend, again, you've far exceeded anything we've asked you to do. Come on and talk about the threat of Ebola, what's going on. You really bracketed the information very well, explained it very well. I want to say just thank you. Is there anything before we cut you loose that you want to cover that you haven't covered?
I think we're on the cutting edge of enough. We're opening up a Pandora's box if I keep talking. So I've really enjoyed coming on with you guys. I always do. I so appreciate you and your program, and I'm glad to see you guys have partnered with my friend Sheila Zelinsky, who just does a wonderful job, and I'm glad I have people like you on the same side as I'm on.
Well, roger that. We're glad to have you on our side as well. You are a very formidable, ally. Thank you so much for everything you do. Dave Hodges, CommonSenseShow.com. Folks, visit his website and look at the articles. Dave, thank you for coming on. God bless you, my friend.
My pleasure, guys. Talk to you later.
Safe. All right.
Thanks, Dave.
And I want to thank Marianne for sending this in. Marianne, a listener. Bill Gates says vaccines can help reduce world population. This was published back on October 1st, 2010. Folks, remember this. We had talked about this. In fact, I know Dave Hodges had talked about this and brought this up. The elites will get certainly good vaccines. So they will decide who gets what kind, who lives and who dies. But Natural News, Mike Adams had written an article at a recent TED conference presentation, Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates. Now, this is, again, written back in 2010, October, who's donated billions or hundreds of millions of dollars to new vaccine efforts, spoke on the issue of CO2 emissions. Again, this goes back to, the global warming scenario and the effects on climate change. Now, he presented at that time, and folks should remember this, a formula tracking CO2 emissions as follows. CO2 equals, and it's a real simple formula, P, which stands for people, S, which stands for services per person, E, energy per person or per service, and C, CO2 per energy unit. Now, in order to get CO2 to zero, probably one of those numbers is going to have to get pretty close to zero. And, of course, he's zeroing in on the people. And, of course, but reducing the world through population through vaccines, he said that Bill Gates was Bill Gates said we could reduce the world's population. If we really do a good job on new vaccines, we could lower the world population by 10 or 15%. What in the world
You're
does
taking
that mean?
that out of context. I've heard so many excuses for what he said in the comment. Just like the TED Talks where he gave the speech that, I think he put up the population, growth, carbon, put up 4 different sets of numbers, and he said we have to get one of these numbers to 0. And he was implying people. That right. He was the one that introduced the death panels, was the one advocating for them. They're advocating them before Obamacare was even passed. And George Soros plays a role in this too, with ownership of certain bio weapon labs, from the Department of Defense involvement to Tulane University and others. He's been it's been pointed out that they actually shut down one of his labs and was under investigation, as well as the Tulane lab. And you see the Gates, you see the Soroses behind this push for a international, and we see it's not just the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization is enlisting the help of the World Bank, which they want to implement the UN. The World Bank, what is this set up to be? One world religion, one world economy, one world political force. And that's what the UN, the World Health Organization, and the World Bank are here for.
Well, clearly.
As their stated goals.
Exactly. And clearly we're looking at through Agenda 21 population, or the climate change agenda, all of this. We're looking at reducing, or not we, but the elites are looking at reducing world population. And Gates seems, I'll go back to Gates here, he seems to be saying that one of the primary purposes to reduce global population, one of the primary purposes is to reduce the global population as a mechanism by which we can reduce the CO2 emissions. Convince people that people are responsible for CO2 emissions, and then reduce the world population. And folks, you can just look on, you can do a YouTube search, and find the video where he says this. Now, here people might say, well, wait a minute. Now, how in the world can vaccines be used to reduce the world's population? And if you think about this, what Dave Hodges said, okay, what Dave said.
No, I'm not laughing because I think it's outrageous. I know it's true.
Well, they could kill people very slowly, or slower than the actual disease itself. All right, in a way that's really not noticeable, or effectively noticeable, or essentially noticeable. Even
one example I heard, if people want to look into this to find out if it's true or not, was mad cow disease, a form of it can lay dormant in your system for up to 40 years and can be triggered by some sort of chemical that would be introduced at a later time. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that was the example that was given. And could you imagine something like that? You already have it, and there's nothing you can do except wait for them to implement or release their phase 2, which activates that disease.
Yeah. And
then the fears surrounding all that would lead you to, look at 9/11, and this is a quote from an article from thetotalcollapse.com. It says on September 11th, 2001, the American public was subjected to trauma-based mind control.
I agree with that.
Brainwashing. Trauma-based mind control uses extreme fear or horror to shape subconscious minds of its victims. It's a highly effective technique for making people submit to authority without realizing what they are doing or why. And they go on to state, could this Ebola scare be a false flag that is turned into a real threat or a real issue? And they list several examples of how this was used before, the threat turning into a false flag. They list the Lusitania. They list Pearl Harbor, 9/11.
all of those, the Gulf of Tonkin and so on. Yes, we've, that's the thing that, and when we come back after the top of the next hour, I want to talk about Benghazi because the hearing started today, the Select Committee in Benghazi. This all plays into the larger scheme of things, but. Look back in history. Folks, that's why I'm really big on historical events and things that have happened in history. Look back and see how we have been played as fools from Pearl Harbor, Lusitania, as Joe mentioned, and one of the most unreported, unknown, and even still to this day, disputed events back on March 3rd, 1968, when the Soviet K-129 sub went down in the Pacific. That Soviet K-129 sub was equipped with nuclear missiles, and one of the missiles exploded in the missile silo. Well, that missile was destined, reportedly, and I believe I can say this with authority, to Honolulu. And what was taking place at that time was the Russians wanted to get the United States out of the game. Well, how were they going to do that? Instead of taking them on directly, they were going to fire a nuclear-tipped missile from the K-129 300 miles away from Honolulu and blame China for it, or have China be blamed on it. And, of course, we would retaliate against China, and don't forget the time period in which this would have taken place, when we were active in Indochina, in Vietnam, at the height of the Vietnam War. And, of course, for those interested, you could research the Glomar Explorer and such, and you can find information about that. So think about what a different world we would be living in had that actually taken place.
And what Dave talked about earlier, he doesn't we're living in a time that's different from any time before, from what the Bible says. And it mentions here, except those days are shortened, there will be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And this is pertaining to the tribulation, the great tribulation, such as not was since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever will be again. And we're given a set of things that will happen, events, from the earthquakes, from the famines, to, the apostasy, the hatred of people, the gospel being preached into all kingdoms, the wars and rumors of wars. All these things, as many people say, are on one of the first times all these things are on the table and are going on simultaneously.
That's right.
So if this is not the beginning of the Great Tribulation, it's certainly an indicator as to the times that we live in.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. But by the way, when I asked Dave Hodges about Bill and Melinda Gates, or Bill Gates, why Bill Gates and what the deal was there, let me mention this, because this, again, Mike Adams from Natural News had written about this earlier. This certainly is not my intellectual material. So Bill and Melinda Gates, they have funneled, and I didn't know this. Well, I guess I did know this, but I suppose it just wasn't foremost in my mind. They funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into vaccine programs targeting people all over the world, including one program researching the development of sweat-triggered vaccines. Now, think about that. That could be used specifically, or that could use specially coded nano materials to deliver vaccines to people without using injections. And that does translate into without one's consent as well. But even more interesting than that, the Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates, the great people that they are, kind of makes you want to throw your Microsoft Windows machine PC out the window, doesn't it? anyway, they also invested millions of dollars into sterilization technologies that are called a temporary castration solution. Think about that.
Yeah, and I want to, I've been doing a lot of research into different writings from Freemasons, and Benjamin Franklin, in one of the publications from 1734, writes about why the philanthropist aspect of their behavior is so important. They believe that because it says in the Bible, charity covers a multitude of sins. The more the money they give, the more they're forgiven. Not only that, on the face value of the contributions they make, it makes them look above suspicion when it comes to implementing nefarious agendas. And they say as much in their own writings. So you have a person like Bill Gates with all this money who is, donating $50 million to vaccines or whatever the cause is. He's not doing so to help people, to better people's lives. He's doing so he thinks he's, one, going to cover his own sins, and two, he's going to, come off as a person who is very generous and above the suspicion of being a globalist, death panel, population killer, eugenicist.
The enormity, folks, of all of this is it's almost beyond comprehension when you think about this, even to the point where I find myself wanting to turn myself off. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, change the channel. Please, change the channel. But I'm going to thank LDF. I won't get the name here. Sending me a news flash, Joe. This just in. Health officials are waiting for a ship from Africa to dock in New Orleans. The crew is sick with illness. Health officials in New Orleans were alerted Wednesday, that's today, and again, this is a live broadcast, it's the 17th day of September 2014, of a ship scheduled to arrive in the lower 9th Ward with men suffering from some sort of illness. Now, officials in New Orleans confirmed that the CDC, the Coast Guard, various other physicians, medical specialists are awaiting the ship's arrival.
Yeah, this goes along with what I see here. There's a Ebola response roadmap that is a 26-page PDF document put out by the World Health Organization that talks about this roadmap that will continue to fight against the escalating outbreaks of Ebola. And it goes on to state that this Ebola virus disease outbreak response plan outlines the time and initial estimate of resource requirements. It talks about, it gives dates that are in the future here. It talks about a number of deaths that will be reached, and then when that number is reached, they will be able to declare an emergency to give the full-scale coordination and international support for the full implementation of their response plans. And they don't talk about this as a if it's going to happen, it's a when it's going to happen. It goes on to say that it acknowledges that the aggregate caseload could exceed 20,000 over the course of this emergency. The roadmap assumes that a rapid escalation of the contemporary strategies will allow the application of the containment strategies within 3 months of this document. So they expect to implement this in the countries that are being affected within 3 months of the release of this document, which was released on August 28th, 2014. And it's a UN-led plan. It will be implemented with emergency personnel who will be involved in food security, sanitation, hygiene also. That's the minimal things that they're involved in. But as I said, they're going to be involved in social mobilization, full community engagement, burials, surveillance, tracking, and monitoring. They're going to be involved in implementation of different programs on the continuity of the plan, they say, to ensure that the they will be able to continue to move unhindered. The World Health Organization will prohibit all travel, will implement and monitor exit screening at all international airports, seaports, and major land crossings. They will establish...
Wait a second. Stop right there if you can, because Chris sent an email with a question, and I think that this kind of, if we approach what you've got there with the question from Chris, and I think this is on a lot of people's minds right now. Chris writes, what are the signs that we should be looking for to decide not to commute or travel to work or anywhere else for that matter? If we want to avoid the roadblocks, will there be any signs ahead of time that would give us a clue to take the day off, or, not go outside? Let's see. She writes that she travels 52 miles over an hour to work, and that's a lot of people that do that. So is there anything in particular that she and our listeners should be looking for?
Well, here in the United States, from my research, unless there is a airborne Ebola that is out there that has been released, from what I understand, the Ebola virus mimics a lot of different ailments that come in a third world country from the lack of sanitation and hygiene, like malaria. Here it would be more noticeable, and we've seen people recover from the Ebola virus here. I don't know what the threshold for quarantining yourself would be. A lot of people are stating that they are implementing the vaccine in order to disperse the disease, which could be true, it could be not true, but it plays into that fear, hyping up the fear. Why is there so much attention being paid to it here in the United States? Why are they giving press conferences on it? Why are there's so much news coverage on it when we don't have a pandemic here? It is in Africa. Just like the ISIS terrorists, why are we the ones that are leading the efforts to get involved in this Ebola crisis in the international community? Just like we are the only ones really getting involved, or at least at face value right now, in the crisis in the Middle East. I think the United States is a huge backbone to the UN and their military aspirations. And I think that's one reason.
Well, our military might, and we're going to talk about this after the break here, our military might is, it really affects everything, including but not limited to the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. We will go for the top of the hour break. We missed actually the first one. Folks are listening to a very special edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. This is Wednesday, the 17th day of September 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann in studio with
Wednesday, September 17th, 2014. Don't forget, tomorrow we will be joined by Paul McGuire. He will be our guest. It's going to be a fantastic show. He is always so informative, hitting on current events and Bible prophecy, like the expert that he is. We're really looking forward to that. And this hour, we're not going to take any phone calls. We do have a lot of other news to get into. And with all the stuff that's going on, something that has been overlooked is the Benghazi hearings have begun. And we have a news or audio clip we're going to play from the chairman of the commission, the Benghazi Commission.
That's right. Trey Gowdy. It's a 2-minute clip. Here's what he said today.
So to those who believe it is time to move on, to those who believe that there is nothing left to discover, that all the questions have been asked and answered and that we've learned all the lessons that there are to be learned, we have heard all of that before. And it was wrong then. It is stunning to see the similarities between the recommendations made decades ago and the recommendations made by the Benghazi ARB. And if you doubt that, I want you to compare the recommendations of those made a quarter century ago, 25 years ago, with the recommendations made by the Benghazi ARB. We do not suffer from a lack of recommendations. We do suffer from a lack of implementing and enacting those recommendations. And that has to end. So it is appropriate to review the recommendations of the most recent ARB, and I commend our colleague from California, Mr. Schiff, for suggesting that we do so. And it is also fair to ask why we have not done a better job of implementing recommendations made, in some instances, decades ago. In other words, why does it take an attack on our people or our facilities for us to make a recommendation? Why not evaluate the threat before the attack? Why not anticipate rather than react? In conclusion, the people that we work for yearn to see the right thing done for the right reasons and in the right way. And they want to know that something can rise above the din of partisan politics. They want to trust the institutions of government. So to fulfill the duties owed to those we serve and in honor of those who were killed, maybe, just maybe, we can be what those four brave men were, neither Republican nor Democrat, just Americans in pursuit of the facts and justice, no matter where that journey takes us. With that, I would recognize the ranking member from Maryland.
Well, those are the words of Trey Gowdy, his opening statement, and you'll notice, as I had predicted, stated, and warned, that if we begin talking about diplomatic security, which essentially is what he was referring to, that, of course, it was not going to go anywhere. I have been in touch with a D.C. insider, that's what I will call this individual, a D.C. insider, known to me, requesting anonymity, bottom line, and this is the statement from the D.C. insider. Select committee won't go there. And where is there? Well, the select committee is not going to go to where they need to go. Where they need to go, or what's happening with the select committee, is they are focusing on things like the ARB report, the Accountability Review Board report. Folks, it's an inside joke. You want to take a guess of how many pages the ARB report was? Yes, 39. Okay, now you might think, well, so what? You know, again, what does that have to do with anything? Look, they're giving you, it's an inside joke, shall we say? It's an inside joke. You understand the significance of 39 pages. But having said that, if you look at, and I'm just going to make this very brief, people know where I stand on Benghazi. It is, in fact, the seminal moment that would expose the entire agenda of not just Obama, not just Hillary Clinton, but the Gang of Eight, Republicans and Democrats. The Select Committee on Benghazi and other, and listen, please listen carefully, and other similar investigative bodies, both governmental and private, or not NGOs. Think about that statement hard. Are infiltrated. They're being managed. If you want to know how badly this is being managed, perhaps the most, and I'm going to end with this, perhaps the most visible and effective misdirection out there has been the creation of a partisan website using government resources. Folks, you probably have not heard about this before. I haven't heard any news stations talk about this. I haven't heard any talk show hosts talk about this, but there's a website out there. It's a government website. It's called Benghazi on the Record, Asked and Answered. This website contains the Select Committee logo. And you know what? At first glance, it would appear to represent the committee's findings, this committee's findings, before the investigation has even started. What it actually is, folks, is a public relations offensive. And despite its glossy appearance, it's offensive, all right. It's an offensive, all right. It was an offense to the truth. I found this website when I was doing research. It's actually split into two separate parts. And Joe, I'll ask you this question. I'll ask you for a guess on this. The questions and answers. There's two parts of this website. The first part is the question and answer section, database. The second part's a compendium. Within the database section of the website, there are a number of questions that have been reportedly, quote, asked and answered. Do you want to take a guess of how many questions have been, or how many questions are there? What number they're using?
25.
Take another guess. I'll give you one more shot at it. Numerology. Occult numerology.
27?
13.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a list of those questions?
Yeah. Well, you can go to the website. I don't have it in front of me. I was like Dave. I was up at 4 a.m. this morning doing research. But the question number 13 addresses the conspiracy theory of an arms running operation. Yes, the conspiracy theory of an arms running operation. In closing, here are a few questions of my own that won't be asked or answered either by that website or by the committee. Tell us, please, what was the exact purpose of the special mission or villa in Benghazi? And was it serving as diplomatic cover for the CIA annex, which was located, by the way, 1.2 miles by roadway, or in actuality, about 100 yards from the villa? Tell us about the Syrian-owned Egyptian-flagged vessel Latfala II, which is a cargo ship with a crew of 11 that was detained in April of 2012 off of Lebanon. I'm not going to get into where and such, but that ship was found to contain some 300,000 pounds of weapons destined for the anti-Assad rebels in Syria. And by the way, according to a eyewitness named Hassan Diab, he's a Libyan journalist, that ship was loaded at a Benghazi port with cargo of weapons destined for the Syrian rebels. Can we talk about that, Mr. Gowdy? Are they going to allow you to talk about that, sir? Tell us about another question. Tell us about the 5 warehouses located in and around Benghazi and Misrata, Libya, that were under the control of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and accessed by the CIA, which were used to store weapons destined for Syria. Do tell us about that. Oh, wait, speaking of ships and weapons, please tell us about the Libyan-flagged vessel, the Al-Intisar. Translation, the Victory, at the Turkish port of Iskandar, which is only a mere 35 miles from the Syrian border. That was on September 6, 2012. That ship was found to be carrying some 400 tons of cargo. A little bit was humanitarian, but as described in a September 14th report by the Times of London, there were a lot of weapons on board that were destined for Syria via Libya. The Ho Chi Minh Trail of weapons running. So, are we going to address those few questions, Chairman Gowdy and members of the committee? 12 members, 7, I think 7 Republicans, 5 Democrats. Again, partisan politics doesn't matter because the entire committee is being managed. And folks, we're in for a dog and pony show. It's not expected, the hearings are not expected to conclude until sometime in 2016. And of course, all of this is just conspiracy nonsense. And if you ask Chris Matthews, it's just an affront to Hillary Rodham Clinton, who is running for president. I'm sure will
or
be.
Nancy Pelosi. This is just a war on women. We're seeing in from the Benghazi hearings. This all this is about. And she went on to say today, I didn't upload the clip, a minute clip, that we're not at war with ISIS, but the war on women is waging, full blown.
You know, sometimes
between John McCain stating how he wants to arm ISIS and how he talks with them every day, to Nancy Pelosi and her ramblings, to Chris Matthews and his tinglings. I mean, you had to laugh, otherwise you're gonna cry.
Good old Tingles Matthews, and of course Mad Mike Malloy, mad in the truest form of the word, not angry, but mad by definition. Mad Mike Malloy.
Yeah, that guy is out there. Pray for that man if you can, because some of the things he's, I mean, the way he takes the Lord's name in vain, he uses the most outrageous and insane name-calling tactics when referring to the Lord. What do you call it? Last time I heard, he referred to him as the drunken, savior. Something just out there, You just shake your head and wonder what happened to this person as a child that he's so bitter and mean as an old man.
Yeah, and then you've got to wonder if he did eat lead paint chips as a child as well. That stunned his intellectual growth. But maybe that's mean. I shouldn't say that. All right, Joe. We got a lot of news to get into.
Today is Constitution Day. Did you know that?
I've got my copy of the Constitution here on my desk, the United States Constitution, and I did not know that until you brought it up. That's how well, I'm on top of things.
September 17th is designated as Constitution Day in recognition of the anniversary of the signing of the Constitution in 1787. And the website, The New American, has a list of 24 constitutional questions every American should be able to answer. And there's some interesting and relatively simple to common sense questions here that, a lot of people really don't know. I saw.
I'll bet you. Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe, but I'll bet you this, ladies and gentlemen. Seriously, if you take one of the actual citizenship tests, and to our audience, even though you guys, and I know you guys are like the smartest listening audience of any radio broadcast, but if you take a test, I'll bet you can't get half of the questions right about the Constitution. What do you think?
I'm going to ask you a few. Number 20, the last one, number 24.
You're going to embarrass me, aren't you?
How many times is the word democracy mentioned in the Constitution?
Oh, none.
Exactly right. Question, let's see. Question 12. Are there any specific crimes mentioned in the Constitution?
Specific, I didn't hear you. Specific crimes?
Specific crimes, yes.
Yes.
Can you name one or two of them?
Sedition, treason.
Yep. Bribery, counterfeiting, and piracy.
I was going to say counterfeiting. Piracy escaped me.
Number 8. What are the constitutional requirements for a person to be president?
Oh, I know this one. Oh, pick me.
Go ahead.
Okay, and we can give the people in the chat room.
And he's not looking at his Constitution.
Yeah, you have to be over 35 years of age, be a natural-born citizen, according to Article 1, Section 2.
You got 2 of them, yep.
Okay. And you've got to be a white rich guy.
Nope.
No. Okay, the third one is you've had to reside in the United States for a period of 5 years?
14
years. I'm sorry.
You were a lot closer. I mean, I knew 35 years and the natural-born citizen. I didn't know about the residing in the United States for 14 years.
14 consecutive years, by the way.
Does the Constitution give the federal government power to create a central bank?
No, and heck no.
Where in the Constitution is there authorization for foreign aid?
That would be on the last page right under the... no, there is none.
All right, one more. Does the Constitution allow the president to make law?
Absolutely, positively not guilty, Your Honor. No.
Right. All legislative power resides in the Congress. An executive order is considered to, they say here, an executive order that binds only the employees of the federal government is proper because the president should be considered to hold power much like the CEO of a corporation. to rule his employees. But the entire nation is not in the under the authority of the president. The president does not have a role in lawmaking with his possession of veto. He can veto a measure produced by Congress, which can still be overturned, sign a law produced by Congress, or simply allow a measure to become law by doing nothing within 10 days.
Barry Sotoro, Bathhouse Barry must have missed that memo.
Here's one for the chat. How many branches of government do we have? This is simple.
27. There's 3.
No, as many as we have states, 57.
You know, every time that 57 comes up, I think of Heinz 57. Yeah, 3.
Judicial, executive, and legislative.
Right, exactly.
One more question here. Does the Constitution allow a president to take the nation to war?
Oh, I know this one. Do you want me to answer this, or do you want to chat?
Well, I guess we can all just...
No.
I think we all know.
I think we do, too. Of course not. War has to be declared by Congress. But do you know what percentage, or is it by the majority vote, or by 2/3, or does anyone know? Well, it's a homework assignment for later. You can look that up in the Constitution. And
for the war powers, what's the majority?
Yeah.
The Senate has to 2/3.
2/3 of the Senate, correct. All right. Well, there's your homework assignment.
Here.
No homework tonight for you then.
Here's a good one. Are the Bill of Rights considered part of the original Constitution?
Wow. No.
The answer here says many do hold that view because of the promise to add the Bill of Rights had not been made. Some states would not have ratified the Constitution, and it might not have become the supreme law of the land. So apparently, yes. It says many do hold the view that the Bill of Rights are considered part of the Constitution because if the promise to add the Bill of Rights had not been made, some of the states would not have ratified the Constitution, and it might not have become the supreme law of the land.
All right. Well, I can go with that. I mean, I look at the Bill of Rights as an addendum to the United States Constitution, a very important addendum, but not part of the actual Constitution document. But okay, we'll go with that answer.
Here's an interesting question. What does the Constitution say about financing a military arm?
Financing a military, like a military branch?
Yeah. It says, it's in Article 1, Section 8, says the Congress can raise an army, but no appropriation of money to fund it shall be for longer than 2 years. The same article says Congress can provide for a navy without the same restriction regarding funding. Why? It says, the men and women who wrote the Constitution feared the possibility that a standing army housed within the territory of the nation might arise and seek to take power. But they did not fear that a navy would try that because the navy and its weaponry did not reside within the nation, but only on the sea or coastal seaports.
Boy, I'll tell you what, folks, I took that, and if they ever offer this again, ladies and gentlemen, I would highly recommend taking the course at Hillsdale College. It's an online course. I think it was a 13 or 16-week course about the Constitution, and you could take it online. And it was an interactive course, and it was fantastic. If you missed a week, they would archive the lecture, and it included tests and everything. That was Hillsdale College that offered that. It was free of charge, and it was a learning experience that I'll never forget. So watch for that to come back. Perhaps they'll re-offer that again. I don't know how many of our listening audience took advantage of that, but quite there's just so much online that you can actually learn from, and that is something fantastic. So, okay.
And 2 more questions here, I guess. This is a good one. What authority does the Constitution give to the Vice President?
Break ties in the act as the tiebreaker in the Senate. Okay.
That's one I wouldn't have known. But the other one is to take office.
Right.
To be ready to take office if the president dies or becomes incapacitated. And then this is a relatively simple one. May treaty law supersede the Constitution?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, simple answer. Nope. Not at all.
And folks, this is where the various treaties too, and it's kind of good to talk about this and to remind ourselves too, the small arms treaty that we're faced with. Look, Congress has got to ratify that, but even if they don't, absent of that, the United States must act or operate as if the treaty is actually in force. Did you know that? Yes.
Hey, what was we have a listener who wants to know for the website you mentioned on Benghazi. Is it Benghazi on the record, and is it .com or .org?
It is. Let me check my notes here. I am trying to finish an article, a report on this, because this is so important, folks. It really is so important. It is Benghazi on the record, asked and answered. If you just put that into a browser search engine, let me see if I copy down the URL. Just search that. It's off of the Benghazi Select Committee, or the Select Committee on Benghazi. It's a .gov address, and of course .gov URL. I'm looking through my notes quickly. I don't see it, but you can insert it in the search engine, and you'll find it. It is, once again, I'll repeat it once again. Where did I put it here? Benghazi on the record, asked and answered, and that is an unbelievable, and I mean that in the truest sense of that word, a website.
All right. Let's see what we have in other news. We have the House passed a bill today to audit the Federal Reserve, and this was passed by 333 yeas to 92 nays. The bill would require the Comptroller General to conduct an audit of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors and banks within 1 year and submit a report to Congress on its findings. A version of the bill sponsored by Republican Ron Paul passed in 2012, and that nothing became of that. Representative Paul Brown, who failed to advance in the Senate GOP primary earlier this year, said the measure would increase transparency at the Federal Reserve. This is a vital piece of legislation that will help usher in a new era of transparency in this nation's monetary policy. The bill sponsor, the Federal Reserve, is a creation of the Congress, and it must therefore be subject to oversight of the Congress. And this article goes on to say, if enacted, which is a huge if, there is probably zero chance. And if this does get enacted, I would be a little concerned about what was going on at the Federal Reserve, because for over 100 years they have been able to dodge any investigations, any disclosure of real numbers, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Even in their own papers, they talk about the level of secrecy that they work under.
Yeah, no. I wouldn't even waste my time on even considering any type of legitimacy or assigning any type of legitimacy to this type of an audit. Come on, are you for real? Not you, Joe, or earliest gentleman, but I mean, seriously, will there be an honest audit of the Fed? I don't think so. How could they be? And again, they're neither federal nor reserve. We've got to remember that. Certainly, yeah. I don't believe any of that.
They even state in their own, mission statement, the Federal Reserve Act will provide for the establishment of a Federal Reserve banks to furnish an elastic currency to afford means of rediscounting commercial paper to establish a more effective supervision of banking in the United States and for other purposes. What are those other purposes? They have the ability to create money, therefore controlling the value of the money. They even state here that this system is independent of the government. And they say they must work inside the parameters of the U.S. Congress, but they have never been held accountable or held to question by the Congress.
Well, again, I do believe that any type of audit, in quotation marks, would be certainly insincere, and I would question the authenticity or legitimacy of any type of audit. If you had a real audit of the Fed, you'd have people would be in jail, and
they
really
even say, they have the sole authority over any changes in the monetary policy issued by the Federal Reserve Bank, and that is directly contradicting what it says earlier, that they are subject to the Congress. They say their authority is above and beyond question of any political office here in the U.S.
I think what we need to do is really a program on the Federal Reserve, only because there's a lot of aspects of the Federal Reserve people, believe it or not, other people, your neighbors, your friends, coworkers, do not know or understand. And even to the extent that there are certain aspects of the Fed that affect our everyday lives. Especially if you're buying a house or a car or whatever, but this is something that we have to get into. This just in, I want to thank TJ for this. Thank you for sending this, TJ. Boy, the House votes to fund arms to, quote, moderate Syrian rebels.
Yeah, and I think we touched on this headline right before the show came on.
Right, we did.
But we didn't get a chance to get into it. And I do have that article here. Also, there's another interesting piece I want to get into here. But the House approves the first part of the Obama's war plan to train Syrian rebels. The House voted overwhelmingly Wednesday to back Obama's request for the permission to train and money to arm the more reliable forces among the Syrian rebels, giving the first congressional approval to the White House. Yeah, it just popped up here. Still developing war plans. 273 yays to 156 nays, and it seemed the limitation that is limited to the assistance of Syrian rebels is about only part of the conflict on which there is any agreement. But they say this is the first step to inserting America into a combat role and beyond the current role that they hold right now.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the World War III. We're already in World War III. It's just what stage are we in, and you're watching just another step towards Death Race to Damascus, World War III. Yeah. Certainly not the Yellow Brick Road.
And I heard on the radio that the Pentagon was putting aside up to $500 million to contribute into this effort. Also, there was other State Department and now that Congress has approved for funding of the arming of the rebels. How are you going to decide who to arm? I mean, you have this whole ISIS phenomenon, I'll call it, and they released some videos today. ISIS did, and my father and I watched these videos today before the show. And
oh man,
the one video was called, I believe. Let me pull this up here.
You talked about. I'd like to have their marketing department. ISIS's marketing department. I mean,
ISIS has a really slick and sophisticated media department. That's the title of this article. In addition to being one of the most brutal militant groups currently fighting in the Middle East, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria might also have the most elaborate public relations strategy.
John O'Brennan, he certainly has come a long way from innocence of Muslims to the PR campaign for ISIS.
It goes on to say that these propaganda videos have a strikingly high level of production and quality, sophisticated graphics and logos. The content is English, and it's designed as a recruitment tool for Western audiences. One Mujahideen video shows smiling ISIS members holding AK-47s, handing out candy and ice cream to cheering children.
It's in fact, we should post these that are on our website. They're incredible to see the production quality of these videos. This is something that this is not done in a cave, or this isn't done without some pretty professional assistance. And look, I understand too. I mean, I get it, but, but Joe, I think that this is
the
obvious.
Use of YouTube and Twitter for the ISIS, CIA, what is it, MI6? There's obviously intelligent agencies involved in this, whether there are intelligence agencies or they're from Europe, wherever. They're getting and receiving the help from governments, from highly trained people who understand how to put together. I told my dad the commercial reminds me of a Merrill Lynch commercial you see on TV.
Yeah, and you're right. After you said that, I watched it, and it does. It has that slick, glossy, even the financial, or the recruitment, the appeal, I suppose. It certainly sells the sizzle. It's a Madison Avenue kind of approach to ISIS.
In the main trailer, Flames of War, naked threat to U.S. forces. And it says the Islamic State has produced a new flashy propaganda clip intended to influence American public opinion against U.S. military action against the jihadist entity. Well, that's contrary to what I understand, because last time I knew that they were asking for America to attack them. So we had to ask, and there's been, I think the latest was a New York man. There's been a few people who have been found trying to join ISIS. Did you see those articles?
Yes, and right now I think the numbers are 31,000. Is that consistent with what you've got? Right around 31,000, and a lot of the 31. I shouldn't say a lot. A significant percentage, comparable to, if you would compare it to Al Qaeda, for example, or other terrorist organizations. A significant percentage are people from the West. Well, don't forget the ISIS itself was it was created by our Western intelligence agencies. I say that people say, well, how is that so? Well, we equipped them, we certainly trained them, and this has been a process of over a number of years.
Yes, it has. And what was the original term used to describe the first fighters from Afghanistan that we armed to fight Russia? What were they known as? The Mujahideen, correct?
Right, back in the days of Brzezinski in the the war through the 1980s, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Well, how interesting is it that their ISIS media department is created a new video series called Mujahid Tweets, depicting ISIS, an outlet to distribute their propaganda on Twitter. Why hasn't Twitter banned them? Why has YouTube allow them to, post these videos with that? I mean, we get copyright infringement slapped on us for stuff that's not even accurate. People get their YouTube account shut down for basically anything that isn't politically correct. But these people can go and post these videos and use Twitter and all these other... I mean, they don't hide their name. It's not like they're using a proxy name to get this stuff out. So what's going on?
Well, I think we know what's going on. I think that we're being gamed. And one of the major things, and again, this is why I believe Benghazi is so important. If you go back to former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas, I'm not sure if you remember us talking about this. Former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas, Britain had a planned covert action in Syria with respect to Syria. And now think about this in the context of ISIS. This goes back to 2009. Remember those emails that I referenced. Dumas wrote, I was in England 2 years before the violence in Syria and on other business. This is on a French TV channel. I met with top British officials who confessed to me that they were preparing something in Syria. This was in Britain, not in America. Britain was preparing gunmen to invade Syria. Now, this whole operation is a U.S., British, Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Turkey, all of this, the Gulf states, including the Gulf states, I should say, they were financing officially and unofficially and coordinating the most heinous elements among Syria's rebels under the tutelage of U.S. military intelligence. This is no secret. This goes back to 2009, for crying out loud.
You know, the U.S. and ISIS are fighting for the same goal, to oust Bashir al-Assad from Syria, as their original intentions were, our government, to continue the destabilization of the region. And from where they go from there, we already know. As my dad says, World War III.
And that's what it's all about. I don't know of any. I mean, there are so many folks. You can listen to so many different radio and talk shows out there, but I really think that what we're talking about here is the heart of everything, the heart and soul of everything. We're at the precipice of a global conflagration. We're also at the precipice of an economic meltdown here in the United States and throughout the West. We're also at the precipice, as Dave Hodges outlined, of a potential pandemic. This confluence of events, you've got to look through this, or look at this through the context or through the prism of biblical prophecy. And of course, you've got some people say, well, blood moons. Some people say that they've got nothing to do with anything. Look, I don't know. But is this all coincidence where the Bible says there will be signs in the heavens? Are these not signs in the heavens? I would argue that yes. 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 So, what time is it? Everyone wants to know, what time is it? All I can tell you, it's late. Probably later than we think.
This from the Washington Free Beacon. U.S. government funding anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, anti-American school programs with federal taxpayer money.
And what else is new? They've been doing this for a long time, but which programs is Bill Gertz talking about?
Taxpayer funds are continuing to flow to a slew of U.S. universities that are spending the cash on programs that promote anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and anti-American viewpoints, according to a large group of Jewish and civil rights organizations now pushing Congress to rectify what they call as a systematic problem. Taxpayer funds have been allocated to universities under Title VI of the Higher Education Act since 1965, and the Education Department has exerted little oversight when it comes to these funds, and the educational programs that promote radical views about Israel and even America are what the money's being used for. They said that the funding for anti-Israel programs at U.S. universities has fostered a culture of fear among Jewish state sponsors or supporters on campus and fueled a growing number of anti-Semitic incidents at many schools, the group warned. They go on to say the programs have devolved into hotbeds of anti-American and anti-Israeli activities.
That's right. And I'll just say this, Joe. Folks, once more, we get these documents that talk about, or law enforcement sensitive documents that have various notations about hate crimes, or what are classified as hate crimes. And one of the biggest, if you would, for example, care the Council on Arab-Islamic Relations, they're screaming, saying, "Oh, there's so many crimes against Muslims in this country, it's unbelievable." Well, the actual figures, the actual numbers, the actual crimes compiled against the Christians and Jews in this country far outnumber any type of crimes against Muslims and Islamic locations, whether mosques or whatever it might be. So just keep that in mind. We've seen an exponential rise since 2009 against Christian churches and Jewish synagogues in this country.
And they talk about this in this article, stating that the University of California at Los Angeles is one of the top abusers, as well as UCLA's Center for Near East Studies. The CNES is the Center for Near East Studies. They say the speakers have delegitimized Israel and have been endorsing terrorism at various events. And they go on to say that some of the examples of the propaganda that they are spouting out are that when they met with the terrorist group Hezbollah and openly endorsed them, they started these boycotts of the Jewish states and started a program saying that more people were killed from the Israeli military actions than the Holocaust. And I've heard what the military actions Israel has carried out in response to the rocket attacks as being, and Mike Malloy is one of them, I've heard him a dozen times, compare it to the Holocaust.
Well, one thing you had mentioned, that you delegitimize Israel. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, we've talked last week, and we've talked since this issue was initially brought up, the difference between ISIS, ISIS, and ISIL, ISIL.
I didn't upload that clip, by the way.
Okay. Well, suddenly, after we talked about this last week, we've talked about it many times. Now Glenn Beck is talking about it. ISIL is actually, there's a big difference between the two terms. And when you hear the deliberate use of the acronym ISIL, ISIL, Islamic State of...
Wait, they're not Islamic.
Oh, what are they? They're
I don't know.
Baptists, right? Okay. Well, when you hear of the acronym ISIL, of course, they're referring to the area known as the Levant, which is a greater area that includes northern Africa, including Egypt, and all the way up into Turkey. But what the difference is ISIL, when the term ISIL is used, that is a deliberate omission of the nation of Israel. In other words, those people who refer to this terrorist organization as ISIL, they are delegitimizing Israel and legitimizing the Levant that does not include the existence of a nation state of Israel. And this is, I contend that this is being done deliberately. It's a neurolinguistic programming. So when you talk about the terrorist organization or the agenda initiative ISIS, please use ISIS as opposed to ISIL. ISIL does tend to delegitimize Israel through the omission of Israel being a nation state, whereas ISIS, it really strikes to the heart of the matter, which is Iraq and Syria. Syria being, of course, the key component. The Levant makes it legitimizes the Arab, or I should say the Muslim presence throughout the Middle East, where they have no historical right to exist, right, especially the Palestinians.
It's basically a slap in the face to Israel.
Correct.
And we covered this a little bit last week on the difference between ISIS and ISIL is. My dad did, and we have seen. I think Glenn Beck was the one who talked about it also. But this is not being talked about in the media. Just do a little bit of research. Look up what the Levant is and what it means, and it's very clear to see. And while we're talking about ISIS, I see a headline here. They apparently, in their propaganda war, they have been urging radicals to go to the U.S. soldiers' homes and slaughter them. Interesting that their voices and messages continue to be echoed across all the media for all the people to see. The media ignored a lot of their threats, a lot of their, and I'm not talking about potential attacks or security breaches to the U.S. I'm talking about propaganda.
No, to say it another way, the media is actually acting as a marketing or propaganda arm for ISIS. Correct.
And there's a poll out. Trust in mass media is at an all-time low. And I heard, what was a statistic I heard that 43% of all polls were bogus. But this poll was done by, let's see here. Well, anyway, after registering slightly higher than last year, Americans' confidence in the media's ability to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly has returned to all-time lows of 40%, reminiscent of the levels in the late 1990s. The Americans place more trust in mass media in 2004 than they do now, and the Americans' trust in media in recent years has dropped slightly in election years, and they go on to say there's differences between what they think the election is a trigger of a decline in the media trust, but there's a sharp uptick in Americans who think that news media is too conservative, which is an interesting part of this. And it goes on to state that the percentages show the Americans' overall distrust for the quote-unquote fourth estate and how that has changed in the last 20 years due to social networking, internet, mobile technology. And the growing disconnect, they consider mainstream news as they seek their own personal veins of getting information. At the same time, a general lack of trust in the overall government has also added to this distrust in media. This is a Gallup poll also.
What can you possibly say to all of this? I mean, really.
It's one poll, I believe.
Oh.
And, this story here, I want to hit this. U.S. court rules constitutional rights do not apply to Americans overseas. I don't know if you heard about this or not. This is a few months old, but questions in various countries by government officials over a period of time, 30 different instances have shown that the protections have not been granted to American citizens, and the constitutional rights of these citizens were violated by the American government. And I guess, when you leave the country that you're still an American citizen, but they say that the United States has granted themselves legal power to violate the Constitution by not recognizing these citizens as Americans because they are on international land, and also because of what has been done through the Patriot Act. But, this is important. You see the Ebola stuff that Dave Hodges talked about, and that is all in the news. Part of the papers that have been released by the Department of Defense, some on civil disturbances and dealing with riots and crowd control, others are detainment and resettlement operations. And there's a potential where, people could be resettled into an area that is not the country, to Canada, parts of Canada.
Outside of the country. That's correct. And that's a possibility that's enumerated in the various documents. I
guess at that point it wouldn't apply anyway, the Constitution, but that's just a reminder that not only is it not applying at that time, but don't expect it to either way. But not a lot of... they're really cracking down on people who have been renouncing their citizenship, moving out of the U.S. We saw the passage of that IRS Act that is now mandating that all the countries in the globe disclose financial records of people who were U.S. citizens. And I don't know. It's just this global consolidation of political, economic forces that is going to continue to move towards unification period, using whatever crises they can for their own furthering of that goal until they are done.
That's exactly right. It's all about consolidation. It's all about consolidation of power, consolidation of the one world religion, New World Order, one world order, the political, the religious, the financial systems. This is what we're going to. This is where we're at, folks. ISIS is a big part of it. Everything we've talked about tonight is really segments or spokes in the wheel. And the wheel, of course, is this New World Order. Joe, I'm about done. I'm losing my voice for reasons I don't know. Maybe it's my asthma coming. I don't know. Now, and check your medical records, folks. Make sure they're correct.
Is that your insight tip of the day?
That's my tip of the day, believe me. seriously, I would definitely check, because I just could not believe, just couldn't believe it. Where did that come from?
Yeah, and then to be told that, the people who put that on there can't remove it.
Well,
the electronic medical records, it's going to be harder and harder to have changes, things taken off your medical record rather than having them added. One last headline here, and then we'll close it out. But this is from yesterday, and I thought this was important because we see the crackdown of Christian and American literature and T-shirts, anything that is promoting Christianity or even America. People have been suspended, removed from school. Well, Satanists are now handing out religious literature at schools without any prohibition or confiscation of their materials. It's been reported in New York, Orlando, Virginia, and it goes on to say that the school wrote that the Satanists may be allowed to give out their material to students, and that the school is not going to interfere with the constitutional rights of the children. But take a Bible to school. See what happens.
Man, unbelievable.
On a bad note, but that will be it for tonight. Tomorrow, Paul McGuire will be our guest. 8 p.m. We'll be here. It's going to be a great show. I'm sure we'll get more in depth on Ebola, on ISIS, and on what is happening in our country through a biblical perspective. So make sure you tune in or catch the archive if you can't listen live. And thanks for tuning in tonight.
Good night.